The heroes have gathered together to face death itself, the Misty Flower crew and their leader known as the Immortal, a man who cannot die. A berserker player named Yunha lived to destroy monsters. That was the whole point of his existence. He and his team descended into one of the 8 black dungeons of the world, the Abyss. No one had ever gone that far before. Many monsters were destroyed there, but many more remained to be slain. But Yunha knew neither rest nor sleep. All he cared about after defeating each monster was which monster to defeat next. And in the Abyss, there was plenty to choose from. It seemed that there were so many possible opponents that it was impossible to remember each one, and not even necessary. The hero fought bravely. He did not yet know that in this dungeon his life of 32 years would come to an end. He crushed one creature with his sword and was already preparing for the next fatal blow, putting all his strength and power into each of them. Behind him were mountains of slain monsters, but Yunha did not look back, moving forward without stopping. And this was a mistake, because the threat was lurking where no one expected it. The monster swung its powerful spiked tail. Yunha felt movement from behind just when it was too late to dodge the blow. After the hero lost his balance, he did not have time to block the next attack. The monster's sharp teeth sank into the hand holding the sword. The confrontation lasted for several minutes. The armor protected the young man well, but the pressure of the monster's jaw became stronger and stronger. At that moment, another blow of the tail followed, and now our hero was unable to stay on his feet. He staggered and began to fall. The stones flew in all directions, but Yunhei managed to free his hand with the weapon and strike back. The monster's head flew high into the air. Another enemy was defeated only to give way to the next one. The new monster was much larger and more terrifying. One of its limbs resembled a huge mace with spikes. When he got a better look at his enemy, Yunha realized that the monster's second arm was no less dangerous. The monster's mouth opened and it let out a terrifying roar. Its teeth were suspiciously similar to human teeth. Could it really be a mutant that once lived among people? Our hero was not prone to sentimentality. He saw a threat, and all he was interested in was how to get rid of it as quickly as possible and move on. But Yunha struck with his sword, but immediately realized why the monster's teeth were not sharp, but wide. The enemy simply clamped the blade like a vice. The sword was broken under the pressure of the jaws. The hero cursed and began to think about how best to act in this situation. He jumped up and pushed off the monster's back with his legs to jump further away, increasing the distance. Upon landing, Yunha sent a wave of splashes around him, defeating so many monsters that the entire ground was covered in pools of blood. Even though the weapon was broken, it was still possible to fight for one's life and fight with the remaining part of the blade. But Yunha enveloped it in mana, which made the fragment much stronger, while the monster gained momentum for an attack. Despite its incredible size, the monster was quite fast and agile, and the distance was reduced very quickly. Our hero's broken sword, glowing blue, floated in the air, transformed into a powerful weapon and ready to deliver its final blow. The monster was huge, but Yunha calculated the trajectory of his sword correctly and hit his opponent in the neck, the most vulnerable spot. The blade entered the creature's body up to the hilt, bloody streams gushed from its mouth, and a monstrous roar almost deafened the hero. With a sharp movement, Yunha pulled his weapon out of the dead carcass and turned around to assess the situation around him. There were no new opponents in sight, and the young man happily inhaled as much air as he could, checking to see if his ribs were intact. Not long ago, he had fallen hard on his back. It was necessary to assess the situation behind him, but Yunha looked back. His eyes lit up with fire. It was a special vision. The hero saw that behind him were not only the defeated monsters, but also the other hunters who had descended into the dungeon with the team. All were dead. Well, if there was no one else to help, Yunha decided to help himself and began looking for a new sword to continue his journey forward. A suitable blade was found quite quickly. With its help, one could try to pass through the stone gates towering in front of the warrior. It didn't matter, but Yunha was determined to overcome the obstacle and defeat the dungeon boss, even if he was alone. What this boss would be like could be guessed from the stone images of monsters on the gates. Our hero headed straight towards them. He pushed his sword into the crack, making it a little wider, and then used his hands to push the gate apart enough to walk through. Then the rocks continued to move on their own, and the hunter resolutely entered where no man had ever entered before. There was nothing there but dense, impenetrable darkness. The light coming through the gate was only enough for a few meters. But Yunha assessed this impenetrable darkness and realized that the boss, the master of darkness, was definitely hiding right here, nearby. Suddenly, the young man's eyes widened in horror. He realized that he had made an unforgivable mistake by underestimating his opponent. The master of darkness was also looking at him. The attack was so swift that the hero did not even understand how it happened. He was already falling backwards with a fatal wound in his chest. The numerous rocks, one of which had pierced Yunhee's body, flew back at a terrifying speed under the impact of the powerful force of the blow. The hero was turned upside down several times. He was completely helpless. The weapon fell from his hands. Blood flew in all directions. The movement did not stop. Falling to the ground, No Yuna realized that this was the end. He couldn't move even the tip of his finger. The hero laughed ominously. He didn't expect to die so stupidly. The player's last thoughts were that humanity was not yet ready to fight the Master of Shadows. He was too strong. The hero sat in a pool of blood, leaning against a rock, and thought that it wasn't so bad to meet his death in a dungeon where no one had ever reached. Here, he heard a deafening cry full of despair. The girl ordered Yunhei not to even think about dying. She cursed and scolded him, urging him not to give up. It was Li Yuan. Our hero looked at her and thought that it was a hallucination. She could not have survived, and even more so, to be nearby so deep in the dungeon. The girl was a good magician. Tears were running down her face, but her hands were doing their job. She was casting a healing spell. Kneeling over Yunhei, Li Yuan tried her best to close his wound, but it was a huge hole in his stomach, and the task was impossible. The hero realized that he had no chance of surviving, so he asked his friend to leave him and quickly save his own life. Yen screamed at the guy to shut up immediately and not interfere with her doing her job. She needed to convince him that there was hope. In fact, the wounds were too serious, and no healing would help restore the internal organs in such a situation. It could only be a miracle. At this time, Yunha thought that he had already died and entered the afterlife. He did not yet know that a miracle had happened. The guy regretted leaving his partner alone in the dungeon and asked her for forgiveness. He had dedicated his entire life to destroying monsters, caring little about others. He also remembered Baekryun, a girl who had just entered adulthood, and Yunha mentally thanked her for seeing only the best in him. His partner, Li Yuan, attempted to transport the hunter back in time to save his life. This was the miracle she was hoping for and bringing it to life. There was a limit to time travel, but the girl didn't care what price she had to pay for it. And a miracle happened. The desire to save his partner was so strong that he was soon swallowed up by a stream of yellow radiance to take him away from the darkest dungeon forever. This radiance became blinding, and it was no longer possible to make out anything. And this is how miracles of the great power of desire are accomplished. Some people were standing over him and holding out a rattle. They called him by name and asked him to look at them. Our hero decided that he was hallucinating again. Yunha opened his eyes and tried to focus. It was his mother and father. They smiled happily that their son had woken up. The baby wanted to tell his parents a lot, but he was barely a month old, so all he could do was coo. While the mother reproached the father for waking the baby, our hero tried to understand why the afterlife looked like his room as a baby. Mom and Dad looked at the baby again and affectionately asked if he had woken up to look at them. The child reached out and grabbed the woman's little finger tightly, as if he was checking to see if she was real or not. She tenderly asked how long he wanted to hold her hand, while her father plaintively reminded her that he also had hands, and as many as 10 fingers, and it seemed he was a little jealous. Our hero realized that this was not the afterlife, but that he was in the body of a child, and he could not yet speak or even move. He didn't die. He went back in time to when he was only a month old. Yunha continued to hold his mother's finger and thought that this was simply impossible. He realized that Yuan had performed a miracle right before his death. The impossible had happened against all laws. The girl was equal in power to the 12 thrones. It was no wonder that she had succeeded. The parents continued to discuss which of them their son looked more like. He had his father's smile and his mother's eyes. The child looked at them sadly with an adult look. Yunha did not think that he would ever see his parents alive again, but it happened. They died when he was 6 years old. They were killed by monsters. Since then, the boy saw the meaning of his existence in the destruction of monsters. But thanks to Yuan, he had a second chance, so No Yunha vowed that this time he would be able to change the future. He was so determined that he even clenched his fist, but it was the fist of a 1-year-old child, whose parents almost cried with emotion and began to take pictures of their son. Even though our hero retained the memory of his life, he still remained a child, and therefore had very limited opportunities, which was unbearable. All his tasks were reduced to eating well and sleeping. Such torture continued day after day. He had to come up with at least some kind of activity for himself. Given a second chance, Yunha started his journey almost from the beginning, and the first task he gave himself was to simply turn over. While he was trying to practice this simple action several times, his older sister Yuna came up and began to encourage the little one. Yuna was 4 years older than our hero and loved him more than anyone in the world, which meant she spent a lot of time with her little brother. Our hero was surprised that his memories of his sister were much weaker than those of his parents, but he remembered one moment from the past in detail. On the day their mom and dad died, Yuna hugged her brother tightly and promised him that she would always be there for him no matter what happened. On the day the monsters killed their parents, the sister hugged Yunhu tightly and promised him that everything would be fine. She repeated this phrase hundreds of times until her voice began to disappear. In his new second life, the boy, to Yuna's joyful cries, finally made a coup and consolidated his success with another attempt. The girl grabbed him in her arms and continued to praise him. Our hero had not received so much tenderness and love for a long time. At the age of 9 months, Yunha was already sitting confidently, and he was able to see and notice more, and he discovered that mana was all around him. As an adult, the hero constantly experienced a mana deficit, so he decided to start saving it now to create a reserve while his body allowed it. From the outside, it looked rather strange, and my sister asked him what interesting thing he was doing. The boy looked at her, not knowing how to explain, since he still couldn't talk, and then he noticed something interesting. Yuna was like a sponge, soaked in mana that there was so much of it that sometimes the glow went beyond the boundaries of her body, creating a shining silhouette, like a shadow. While she was lifting the baby into her arms, the hero thought that such an amount of mana for an adult would be dangerous and threatening to health. It could end in pyknosis. While the girl was teaching him to walk, Yuna thought about how he needed to teach her to control her energy before it put her life at risk. At the age of 4, our hero began to fulfill this task, because by this time, he had already learned to speak well and move confidently, and also often spent time playing with his sister on the street. She was very sociable and kind to everyone, and although many did not like the gloomy Yunhu, Yuna still continued to take her little brother with her everywhere. The children in the yard always happily invited the girl to join the game. She was cheerful and very inventive. Unlike her brother, the girl got along well not only with children, but also with adults. The neighbors were simply delighted with her. Yunhee's communications with others were completely different and rarely brought pleasure to both parties. One day, he and his sister went out for a walk, and a slightly older girl with crimson hair called out to the boy. She blocked his path and looked at him defiantly, as if waiting to see if Yunha would rise to the provocation or not. Everyone liked to tease him. The girl asked why he had come there. Without thinking twice, our hero explained that he had been dragged there, but that it did not concern her, Dryan Minzy, in any way. The girl got really angry and shouted that she had asked him not to call her that 1,000 times. Kim Minji, that's her name. Yunha pretended that he didn't hear again. The kids on the playground suggested playing Cossacks and robbers because there were quite a lot of kids there, and Minzy continued to be indignant. Yunha was not delighted. He did not understand at all why he needed to spend time in such company at 32 plus 4 years old, but for the sake of his sister, he endured. Yuna was very happy when she managed to drag him to the playground and even play together. This time was no exception. Noticing the displeasure on her brother's face, she decided that the problem was that he was not familiar with the rules of the game, so she cheerfully began to explain. Our hero didn't listen. He was simply pleased to see his sister's smile. He had been deprived of this pleasure for many years. The children had a pretty good time together and only went home when the sun began to sink towards the horizon. Yunha was unhappy that he got so dirty during the game. His clothes looked like he had dug a trench. Yuna continued to have fun and said that it was not scary. The main thing was that they had fun, wasn't that right? She asked. The brother muttered that that was true, but he didn't like walking around the city like that. It would be better to stop and tidy himself up a bit. They would have had to stop in any case. A very angry mutant dog appeared in the middle of the street. It bared its teeth, drooling from its mouth. The girl froze in fear, but still stood a little ahead of her brother in order to protect him with herself in case of an attack. The children froze, not moving, and the dog, with flashing red eyes, came closer and closer to them, preparing to attack. It was difficult to figure out whether it was just a feral dog or an animal with rabies, or a real mutant that had escaped control. Yuna tried to cover her brother with her hand again, but Yunha was completely calm and didn't even take his hands out of his pockets. The girl was very scared but tried not to show it so as not to scare her brother. She tried to assure him that everything was okay. Our hero remembered how on her last day of life she did the same thing, calming him down so he wouldn't be afraid, promising that everything would be fine. Now Yuna's face was just as worried and full of concern for Yunhu as it had been then. He decided that this time he would not allow trouble to happen. The boy looked at the dog with his childish eyes, and the man in his head was considering whether he had the right to use his magical skills. Finally, the decision was made, and Yunha placed his hand on his sister's forearm, covering it with her body so that she would not be afraid. He stepped forward decisively, causing some confusion in Yuna. She did not understand what was happening and why her brother was doing this. Yunha thought that in that life he was weak and just trembled in his sister's arms. But now everything will be completely different. It's time to change his destiny. The boy took another decisive step forward to avoid the mistakes of the past in his new life. He was so confident in his abilities that Yuna did not interfere. She simply stood behind her brother and watched what was happening. The boy cast a defensive spell, using up almost all of his mana, and the dog sensed the threat and stopped. There was so much energy in the air that the animal did not risk attacking. Receiving such a rebuff from a child was something new for her. The mouth opened and closed again, then opened again, but not to bite, but to catch its breath, knocked out by fear. Using the power of suggestion, Yunha commanded the creature to immediately get out of their way, or better yet, to disappear immediately. The animal didn't have to be told twice. The dog quickly turned around and began to run away from this sudden threat. The children watched as the dog ran away into the darkness of the gateway. Yuna didn't understand how her brother managed to do this. Having weakened the protective barrier, Yunha breathed a sigh of relief. In the body of a child, he used magic for the first time and was not at all sure that he would be able to use his skills from his past life successfully. Yuna was shocked. She saw the blue glow of the spell and heard her brother's sigh, so the first thing the girl asked was if he was okay. Yunha answered in the affirmative. He hastened to reassure his little sister, saying that their adventure had turned out to be fun. The girl calmed down and began to ask how her brother did it, whether it was mana, and when he would teach her to do such tricks too. Our hero was a little puzzled, but then decided that this was exactly the reaction of his sister that he should have expected. The moment was quite touching. He pretended to be tired and promised to teach Yuna, which caused a new wave of joy and gratitude towards him. Yun smiled and thought that why not, after all, he was going to prepare his sister for the upcoming events anyway. The girl was very inspired. She couldn't wait to learn how to control mana, because not every person is capable of this. But then Yuna remembered that they were already late getting home, and pulled her little brother forward. They needed to get back before their mother started to worry. Yunha thought that he was ready to give his life for this smile. His family was killed when he was 6 years old, so he needed to hurry with the preparations. In order to change the future, he was ready to do anything, but now he just needed to go home, and that was happiness. Nevertheless, thoughts about the tragedy continued to disturb our hero, but now a plan was maturing in his brain on how to prevent it. Yunha started training by bringing a top and asking his little sister to spin it without using her hands, just with her willpower and mana. Yuna had plenty of mana, but directing it in the right direction was not so easy. The top moved chaotically, without spinning. The girl complained that it was very difficult to control the flow of energy, but her brother assured her that after a few training sessions, everything would work out. Yunha thought with regret that his sister had the gift of storing large amounts of mana since birth, but she had absolutely no ability to control it. But he did not say this out loud. Yuna seemed to read his thoughts. She decisively exclaimed that now she would succeed. She would spin the top correctly on the first try. The girl put all her energy into spinning the top, her hands releasing a stream of mana so strong that it would be enough to demolish a wall. Luckily, there was no wall in front of her, but the top spun so fast that it bounced off the floor, hit the corner of the sofa, and flew over Yuna's shoulder. Then she hit the wall, bounced back, then forward again, to one side, and then the other. Our hero realized that his sister still had a lot to learn, but the first steps had been taken. After a while, the family gathered in front of the TV. Some beauty received a prestigious Academy Award and showered her with gratitude. The house was warm and cozy. Despite the fact that it was winter outside, the feeling of warmth and comfort did not leave our hero. In a few minutes, the new year was supposed to come. Mom reminded Yunhee that next year he would be 6 years old, which meant that, as promised, he had to go to kindergarten. The boy frowned and muttered that he absolutely didn't need a garden, his mother agreed, but added that she could use some more free time, and besides, she had to keep her word. Our hero thought that this would be fair, since he had already avoided the garden for quite a long time, terrorizing his parents with constant whining. He really didn't want to spend time around noisy children who cried for any reason. Just thinking about it gave Yunhee a headache. The hosts of the program reported that there was 1 minute left before the new year. This moment will change the future of all humanity, as a very important event must occur. The announcer asked for attention on the screen. Their correspondent was supposed to go live from the scene of the events. A girl appeared with headphones and a microphone, who said that she was at the Yongmyo Temple, where their ancestors, members of the Joseon dynasty, were buried, and where a new page in Korean history would begin. Our hero grabbed his head. He already knew what kind of new chapter this would be, but he still wanted to refresh his memories and hoped that this time everything would be different. After humanity discovered mana and learned how to use it, everyone seemed to go crazy about it and use skills uncontrollably. But they didn't take into account that this would lead to the appearance of monsters, and on the very day that the 21st century began, an incident called the End of the Century occurred. The monsters destroyed approximately 30% of the planet's population, and the remaining survivors literally trembled with fear. Monsters appeared literally out of nowhere, and it took a long time before the cause was found. The government and laws were no longer in force. The only force that now had weight was mana, which caused a new hierarchy to emerge on Earth, with the rich and the hunters who controlled mana coming to power. Before the situation could be stabilized, the cities lost contact with each other, and humanity was on the brink of survival, in constant horror and chaos. But in Korea, full of despair, a small light of salvation lit up, giving hope to millions of people. It was at the Chonmyo Temple that the beautiful Lim Ga-il appeared, and in the moonlight she came out to people for the first time. Both her face and her clothes were so beautiful that millions of viewers could not take their eyes off their television screens. Yuna also gasped in admiration and even clasped her hands, whispering that she had never seen anyone more beautiful in the world. Lim Ga-il used to be a popular actress, but now she became the first protector goddess of Korea, who needed to give people hope for the future. The woman had the gift of white grace, or more precisely, the ability to stop the action of mana and disperse it. All the players who defended the temple altar became the sword protectors of Korea and were called the 12 Thrones. All the players were controlled by mana control forces, but the strongest of them created their own clans, a thought that haunted Yunhee. As a person with the rarest gift that could stop monsters, Lim Ga-il was chosen to become one of the 12 thrones that protected Korea. She was already a very influential person before, but after becoming the throne, this woman's power increased indescribably. After all, players in this position received help from the clan and help from the Mana Control Committee. This made it possible to monitor the activities of all other players and subordinate them to one's will. One could not even dream of greater power. Lim Ga-il raised both her hands and addressed the 12 thrones with a speech, the gist of which was that their activities should bear good fruit. The woman approached the glowing magic ball and laid her hands on it. The ritual began with the words of prayer. The goddess turned to all the other gods of the earth and heaven with a request to grant her the strength to protect her country at all costs. The glow from the ball became larger and larger, and mana shot out from Limga-il's hands towards the sky in a column of blue radiance. Within minutes, the dome of blue energy began to cover houses, trees, and fields, as if it was trying to cover the entire territory of Korea. The glow was so bright that there was no longer any need to look at the TV screen. The blue light penetrated into the houses of the cities straight from the street, from the sky. The correspondent happily informed the viewers that right now they were watching a protective hemisphere open up, a barrier that would help control the mana and prevent it from raging. Hearing that the barrier could be seen throughout the country, Yuna ran to the balcony to see the miracle with her own eyes. The girl's eyes were shining. She believed that the dome would protect them all. Yunha, who had joined his sister, did not share her delight, but remained silent. The sight was truly stunning. The girl even opened her mouth from the excess of emotion. She had never seen such beauty before. Everything around was filled with diffused blue light. People went outside to look at the dome and feel the sense of security they had long dreamed of. The parents joined Yuna and Yunha, smiling as they listened to the girl's excited cries about how the sky was now incredibly beautiful. The father folded his hands in a prayer of gratitude and said that now they could finally live in peace and quiet. The mother also thanked the goddess and began to pray. Her face glowed with joy and happiness. One could look at it endlessly. All the people around did the same. On the balcony opposite, another family froze in a happy prayer of gratitude, and another one a little lower. The people thanked Limga-il with all their hearts. They believed that now the monsters would leave their country alone and everyone would be safe. Yuna and Yunhee's parents continued to pray, now silently, but it was not difficult to guess what words they were saying in their thoughts. The girl decided that she wanted to pray too. She folded her hands and invited her brother to join them. The boy looked at her with distrust. He was not naive, and besides, he knew what awaited their family and the whole country in the future. Yunha sadly bowed his head and thought that he really had no one to pray to. There would soon be no gods in this world. When the end came, all the gods died too, as did hundreds of millions of the planet's population, as did those who now came out onto the balconies with hope and gratitude. He looked at the windows of the surrounding houses and saw only shadows, only dark silhouettes of the people who lived in them, but it was a memory. Now the windows were shining with a bright and warm light, and people were really alive and celebrating the arrival of the new year, praying and thanking Limga-il for the protective dome. The skies are turning black again, our hero thought, pushing away the vision that had washed over him a minute earlier. Now was not the right moment for this. He heard his sister asking the gods to grant their family a happy and prosperous life, to protect them from all evil. Yunha looked at the girl who seemed like a real angel to him. Hope was awakening in his heart. He wanted everything to turn out exactly as Yuna asked. The boy firmly decided that in this life he would truly be happy with his family, because that was why he was given a second chance. He joined his family in prayer. But in reality, Yunhei was turning 6, which meant that the incident that took the lives of his family was getting closer. The master of darkness was not sleeping. The kraken that killed Yunhee's mom and dad didn't sleep either. Our hero tried not to think about it, but subconsciously felt what was in store for them all. Well, while the boy was waiting for a new stage in his childhood life, the announced kindergarten, by the way, looked quite attractive and was called Doan Evergreen Pines. Teacher Tayo greeted Yunhu and informed the children that a new friend would be joining them from now on. He asked the boy if he would like to introduce himself and tell the other children a little about himself so that they could make friends. Our hero was a man of few words. He gave his name and age, after which he again fell silent with a sullen look. After thinking, he looked at the children sitting on the rug and added that he was very glad to meet everyone. This was not true, but it was polite. Teacher Tayo praised the boy, but noted that the welcoming speech was short. Maybe he should tell something more about himself to make friends. Yunha thought that he was not interested in children friends. But then he noticed a familiar hairstyle among those present, and then a face, and the next moment, indignant exclamations flew towards Yunhee. It was Kim Minji who asked in a displeased tone what he had forgotten in their group, why he had come here, and so on. Our hero was unpleasantly surprised and asked why Drin Minzi was bothering him again, since he was simply busy with his own affairs. The girl was really angry. She didn't want the other children to find out about the unpleasant nickname that Yunha had given her. Teacher Tayo asked the children to calm down. They had enough free time before lunch to make friends, but certainly not to get into conflict. His suggestion to be more friendly towards the new boy caused a whole wave of shouts and questions. Everyone wanted to know where the boy lived, what his favorite color was, and so on. After listening to the children and assessing the situation, Tayo decided that everything was going as it should be. He promised Yunhei that he would soon have many friends. As soon as the opportunity arose to escape from the children and their questions, our hero took advantage of it. He left the playroom and thought that he couldn't stand children. Here he saw a sign indicating a children's book corner, something like a small reading room. This was more interesting. The books were mostly children's, but killing time reading in silence was much more pleasant than fighting off persistent questions. Our hero chose a comfortable stool and began to look for a well-lit place to sit down with a book. He sat down at the table, but his attention was constantly drawn to the pink bow in the hair of the girl who was reading on the other side of the table, which prevented him from concentrating. Slowly turning page after page, Yunha felt that the girl was looking at him carefully, but with his peripheral vision, he saw that she wasn't even looking at the book. Yunha also stopped reading and stared blankly into the space in front of him. He didn't know how to ask the girl not to look so as not to offend her. The baby was quite beautiful. She had huge eyes and dark hair, but the pink bow was incredibly annoying. Apparently, it wasn't just Yunhu. Some boy approached the girl from behind and called out to her in a loud voice. It was Cho Yonghuk and his friends Ma Banjin and Yong Sinjin, who cheekily asked what the point of sitting around reading was. Yonghuk asked the girl, whose name was Yang Hye-yang, why she was always with a book, and whether she didn't have a single friend. The little girl turned to him and simply asked him to leave her alone, but this only made the boy even more angry. The guy screamed that he was terribly irritated by her vulgar pink ribbon and literally tore the bow out of her hair. The girl tried to take the ribbon back, almost crying. Yan Haiyan explained that her dad gave it to her, to which the boy replied that he would not give the bow back simply because he did not want it. Yonhuk began throwing the ribbon to his comrades, inviting the girl to take her bow from her opponents, like a basketball. Yan Haiyan did not do this. She folded her hands, and with tears in her voice asked for the commemorative ribbon to be returned to her. The bully didn't listen. He continued to tease the girl and stick his tongue out at her. It was very childish and not at all gentlemanly. Yunha continued reading, not paying attention to what was happening, but then he again felt the girl's pleading gaze on his back, and without turning his head, ordered her to give him the bow. Yonhuk looked angrily at the hero. The provocation had succeeded. He was lucky enough to run into resistance, which was what the boy was trying to achieve by starting a fight. Yunha slowly rose from his stool and considered whether it was acceptable to swing his fists on his first day of kindergarten. He approached the offender and said that he was behaving like a baby and that the game the boys were playing was not fun at all. Yonhuk called Yunhu a moron and swung his arm to hit him. Apparently, the bully solved all his problems with force and was used to bullying children. He couldn't know that the boy in front of him had 32 years of life experience behind him. Yunha skillfully dodged the blow. The next moment, the offender was already flying back, turning upside down in the air. Everything happened very quickly. Our hero caught the pink bow on the fly and quickly walked forward as if nothing had happened at all. Yonhuk hadn't even had time to land on the ground yet, and his opponent was already handing over a commemorative ribbon to Yang Hye-yang. The girl was confused and surprised. Looking at her grateful eyes, Yunha asked Hye-yang not to let anyone take her things away from her anymore. Surrounded by his friends, Yonghuk promised that he would not leave this incident unpunished, to which our hero thought that it was not so scary to hear threats from a 6-year-old. Here he felt some movement of the aura and looked back at the enemy. It felt like there really was danger in the air. The bully promised that next time Yunhei would really get into trouble if he got in his way. Our hero did not pay attention to him, but at that moment he felt that someone was pulling him by the sleeve of his sweater. It was Yang Hyun, thus calling Yunhu to thank him for helping her return the memorable pink bow. The girl clutched the ribbon to her chest and was clearly embarrassed. But she still managed to overcome her indecision, looked up at Yunhoo and said with a smile, "Thank you for what he did." Just at that moment, Yunha was thinking that among all the children in the garden, Minji and Yeonhook had a lot of mana, while the rest didn't stand out. But then he looked at Yan Hayan with a special vision and was simply stunned by what he saw. The hero did not expect such a turn of events. The girl had so much mana that even Yuna was left behind. Our hero had never seen such an amount of energy. He was so surprised that he even stepped back a little. Yan Hayan had the power to destroy half a city, but she didn't even know about her own strength. Yunha noticed that the girl skillfully controlled her mana. Such a child had every chance of becoming one of the 12 thrones, or their protege at the very least. He leaned over to get a better look at her face. Before the regression, the hero had never heard the name Yan Hayan, and it was strange. Even without becoming a player, she should have become famous already because of the amount of mana. Yunha extended his hand for a handshake and invited the little girl to become friends, adding that he didn't know why, but he really wanted to. Hayan blushed, embarrassed again, but extended her hand in response and nodded hesitantly. She really didn't have any friends. The girl did not suspect that this time they paid attention to her rather out of mercantile interests, because our hero knew that mana was the greatest force in their world. Hayan thanked him for the offer and shook his outstretched hand. Now Yunhee had the opportunity to stay closer to her. Yan Hayan laughed and said that they would not just be friends, but good friends. She was absolutely sure of it. A little more time passed and the holiday of gratitude to parents arrived. Everything went on as usual in Yunhee's house. Mom pinned on the red carnations that were given to her, a symbol of celebration. She was very pleased and thanked her son for such a wonderful gift. Our hero was a little surprised. He made this carnation in kindergarten, but did not take it out of his backpack. His mother found it herself and pinned it to his sweater. The sister also received a portion of praise. The mother said that the flower the girl made looked even better than the real one and stroked her head. Yunha looked at his sister's carnation and thought that she hadn't really done it very well, but there was no need to be surprised. Yuna was, unlike him, a real child. Then Mom remembered that Yunhee had another craft in her backpack. She asked who this carnation was for. Maybe for Yuna. The girl was happy. The woman added that it was very gallant of him and asked who the third flower was for then. The boy didn't know what to answer. The question had driven him into a corner because in fact he had made the third carnation more out of habit. In the end, Yunha replied that he had prepared gifts for his mother, for Yuna, and for his grandmother, which surprised everyone very much. The fact is that having become an orphan, before the regression, our hero every year on this day made a carnation for his grandmother, who was raising him at the time. But he never gave his gift, he just left it in his backpack. The woman always found it herself and decorated their modest room. On none of the holidays did the boy give carnations directly. He suffered greatly from the fact that on Parents' Day, his only relative was his grandmother. To mark the holiday, the government decided to open the closed roads so that families could see their relatives who live far away. This was announced on television. A large number of player hunters were hired to protect the population that decided to travel in the event of monsters appearing. Our hero already knew that on that day, the 4th of May, many people died, including his family, who were destroyed by a giant kraken on the way to the city where his grandmother lived. Just when Yunha was thinking about this, his father came to him and said that the holidays were starting, the roads were open, which meant they could go on a trip. Yuna said that she wanted to go to her grandmother. Her parents happily supported this idea. Besides, they really hadn't seen each other for a long time. Yunha became determined to change the future and therefore realized that he had to cancel this trip at any cost. But it had to be done correctly. There was only one grandmother, and the father was an orphan, which meant that it would not be possible to suggest going to other relatives. The boy loved his maternal grandmother very much, so he didn't want to upset her or upset his relatives by refusing. His grandmother raised him after the death of his parents, doing everything possible to ensure that Yunha grew up to be a worthy person, always supporting him, even in the face of failure. As a result, he became a player. But then she died. The father interrupted the hero's thoughts, reminding him that the roads were open, but they would most likely be closed again after the holiday, and that he needed to decide quickly. Yunha plucked up his courage and suggested to his parents that they go to visit his grandmother another time. He heard what his father said, but decided to take a risk. The parents looked at their son with bewilderment. Firstly, he rarely contradicted them, and secondly, he loved his grandmother very much, so much so that he even made a carnation for her. The mother leaned over to the boy and reminded him about the carnation. She asked if her son wanted to see his grandmother and why she was suggesting going another time. Yunha replied that he wanted to, but not on that day. He again asked to postpone the trip, which caused concern to his mother. Our hero realized that he is just a child. His word means nothing, therefore, in order to achieve success, he needs to behave accordingly, like a child. The boy exclaimed that soon it would be Children's Day, that there was an amusement park near their house, which they had never been to, and that there were rides there that he dreamed of riding. Hearing what her brother was talking about, Yuna also shouted that she really wanted to go to the amusement park. She had completely forgotten about it and had long dreamed of going on a ride. The parents didn't mind. They thought that the children really deserved a trip to the amusement park. It was very close, but because of the monsters, neither Yuna nor Yunha had ever been there. The father smiled and said that they would definitely correct this unfortunate misunderstanding and go ride the rides tomorrow. Mom, smiling, added that this was a good reason to cook something tasty and asked what kind of treat the children would like. Yuna screamed that she wanted nuggets and sandwiches. Yuna almost jumped with joy. It seems his plan worked. Our hero was inspired. If you can't stand in the way of the Kraken, you can stand in the way of your parents, and then everything will be fine. Then the phone rang. It was quite unexpected because the work calls had already ended. Yunha felt that something was wrong. It was as if the universe did not give him a chance to interfere with the events of the future. His mother was talking on the phone, and her voice was becoming more and more anxious. At this point, sweat began to run down the woman's forehead. She asked several times how her mother was feeling now, her voice trembling. At the end of the conversation, my mother asked me to take care of my grandmother and call her whenever necessary. They would pay for everything. After hanging up the phone, the woman's face darkened. She was very worried. Her husband and daughter rushed to ask what had happened and if the grandmother was okay. Mom explained that no one knows the details yet, and there is no diagnosis either, but Grandma fainted and is currently undergoing examination. Yunha was scared. Nothing like this had happened before his regression. His grandmother had absolutely no health problems until he entered the Players' Academy. Mom tried to calm herself and her family down by saying that it was probably nothing serious, but she wanted to see her grandmother to make sure. Dad supported this idea, saying that he was also worried, so he would go with her. But what about the children, he added. Father told Yuna and Yunha that they couldn't go to the park because they would be going to Grandma's tomorrow once the road security was ready. Mom looked at Yunhu. He was very scared and tense. The woman thought it was because of the amusement park, so she decided to talk to him separately. She leaned over and began to console the boy, saying that everyone would definitely go to the amusement park, just another day, and that right now their care was really needed by their grandmother. Our hero thought that he only tried to change the future, and immediately the grandmother suffered. Who knows what might happen if he does not stop these attempts? If he couldn't stop his family from facing the Kraken, then why would he even have a second chance? Yunha was desperate. But still, the new life was somewhat different from the previous one, because something had changed significantly. He himself had changed. Since childhood, he has been accumulating mana and has already collected a decent amount. In addition, he has combat experience from his past life, and in it, he was one of the strongest players. The boy told his mother that it was okay. He agreed. But he himself thought that if he couldn't prevent his family from meeting the Kraken, then he could do something else. Yunha stood facing the wall and thought about his battle plan. Mom and Yuna decided that he was upset and began to console him. But our hero imagined what the monster he had to defeat looked like. Every detail, right down to every sucker on the tentacles, surfaced in his memory. He was gathering his resolve to destroy the enemy, even if he was in the body of a 6-year-old boy. Yunha thought that he would fight the monster with all the means available to him. He would make every effort to prevent his parents and sister from dying. The Mana Control Bureau has classified all monsters based on the level of threat they pose. Monsters of the 9th, 8th, and 7th levels were minor nuisances, such as environmental pollution and the like, while monsters of the 6th level posed a danger to entire areas of cities. Level 5 and 4 creatures committed mass murder and could threaten an entire city and were considered equivalent to medium-strength earthquakes. 3rd-level monsters brought hordes of weaker monsters with them and threatened the well-being of an entire country. They were associated with natural disasters. The Kraken was one of these, committing mass murder and even affecting the Korean government as it could not be neutralized. The 2nd-tier monsters were a disaster for the continent, while the 1st-tier monsters threatened the existence of all of humanity, such as the Master of Darkness that Yunha fought in the abyss, almost dying. Yunha rummaged through his desk drawer, trying to find a weapon suitable for defeating the Kraken, something he had done quite easily when he was an adult. The thing is that mostly C-rank players were hired to guard the roads, and their skills were not enough to defeat such a monster. Our hero sighed, thinking that in a child's body it would be unlikely that he would be able to significantly influence the situation. It was necessary to buy time until the 12 thrones arrived to help, because with fire magic they could deal with the Kraken quite easily. At least last time, it took literally 15 minutes and one of the warriors to stabilize the situation. He took quite a bit of damage, the monster's tentacles repeatedly knocking the player back, but he had good stamina and fighting skills. Of the suitable items, our hero found only scissors and a stationary paper knife. If he enveloped them in mana, he could count on several fairly successful attacks. It would be nice to take a kitchen knife, but Mom would notice if it was missing, so I'll have to use what I found. Mom just looked into her son's room, asking if he was getting ready for the trip. They were about to leave. Everyone was ready, so the woman hurried Yunhu. They needed to get there before the traffic jam started. There were quite a few people who wanted to travel to their relatives. The boy smiled and asked for another 5 minutes. He still had to find and put literally a couple more things in his backpack. Finally, Yunha zipped up his backpack and announced that he was ready. He was ready not only for the trip, but also for the fact that he would have to fight off the monster. The sun was on the horizon, and the streets and bridges of the city were filled with endless streams of cars. Everyone was rushing to take advantage of the open roads. Our hero's family was unable to avoid traffic jams. Their red car stopped in another traffic jam. Yuna was already tired, and they hadn't even left the city yet. Mom turned to the children and suggested that they sleep. Apparently, the road promised to be very long. The boy replied that he was fine and smiled. Yuna fell asleep, leaning on his shoulder, and it was nice to feel the warmth and breath of her little sister. The car gradually moved forward. Now they were driving along the Sansan Bridge, and our hero began to become noticeably nervous. The thing is that last time the Kraken appeared as soon as their car drove onto the bridge. This time they drove halfway, but the monster was still not there. This meant only one thing. Something else had changed in the future, something that Yunha didn't even know about yet, and it visibly scared him. He asked the gods for only one thing, that they would just let the car pass the bridge in peace. But the future could not be changed. An explosion was heard ahead. Mom watched in horror as pieces of asphalt and cars flew in different directions. There was no way to turn the car around and go back because of the traffic. The father froze. He understood that they had absolutely no chance of saving the children while in the car, but at the same time, getting out of the car meant being left completely without shelter. Machine parts and rocks continued to fly at them. The Kraken's tentacles were destroying the bridge and everything on it, and new fires were breaking out. Yuna started to wake up. Yunha continued to hold her hand, trying not to let her get too scared. It seemed to him that the monster was simply mocking his desperate desire to change the future, which is why it was in no hurry to show itself. And then he saw it. It was that same Kraken, a monster equated to a natural disaster within the city. With its tentacles, it scattered cars with passengers like children's toys, demolished houses and bridge supports with one blow, and it was no longer possible to stay in place. His parents realized it too. The father attempted to back up, still hesitating to get out of the car, but the road was blocked by an accident. Someone had already tried to do this before and failed. People ran out onto the bridge and tried to escape by moving in the opposite direction. Everyone was wondering where the players hired for security were. Finally, the player hunters appeared and headed straight for the Kraken's tentacles. The situation could become more favorable. The guards were well armed and prepared to save as many people as possible, but someone had to disarm the Kraken. But then one of them noticed an additional threat that he had not expected at all. The man froze, unable to move. The Kraken's tentacle was rapidly descending straight towards him, and now there was no longer a player, nor a couple of cars near which he was. It was only a miracle that Yoonhee's parents' car was not hit. The other guards, and we remember that their rank was quite low, looked with horror at what was left of their colleague. Everyone reacted differently. Some of the players tried to inflict at least some damage on the monster, while others simply ran away. People got out from under the rubble on their own. Yoonhee and Yun's parents continued to sit in a daze, not daring to get out of the car, but sooner or later it still had to be done. Finally, the father voiced what everyone was afraid of. We needed to get out, but with extreme caution, because there was complete chaos outside. In a trembling voice, the man tried to convince the family that if they moved slowly, everything would end well. Yoonhee looked at his dad as if for the last time. He knew something that was still unknown to his father. Mom turned to the children and said that she loved them, and they needed to do as Dad said. That way they would be saved, the players would protect them. They opened the door and took their first steps across the bridge. Yoonhee was the last to get out of the car. She was the most scared of all. When getting out of the car, the little girl tripped and twisted her ankle. Yoonhee did not have time to give her a hand in time, and something irreparable happened. Now the girl was sitting on the ground and trying to stand up on her foot in fear, but she was unable to do so, and she declared that she could not walk on her own. Yoonhee began to cry, realizing that she needed to get up and save herself, but she couldn't do it. She was afraid of dying herself, but even more afraid of putting her loved ones at risk. Then the father said that there was no point in shedding tears. He could easily carry his daughter in his arms. That way they would walk slower, but would still be able to move forward. He approached the baby and began to carefully lift her up. Mom and Yoonhee did not interfere so as not to create unnecessary trouble. The boy was scared, but not for himself, but for his family. His father asked if he could go and received an affirmative answer. Then one of the players ran up to them and ordered them to follow him in order to get to the evacuation point in the safest way. Yoonhee thought that while the regular players were in a panic, the veterans quickly adapted to the situation and began evacuating people. The boy remembered how it was last time. The Kraken was not the only problem. He needed to cross the bridge before other monsters attacked. But they didn't have time. The next moment, the player who had agreed to accompany them was pierced through and through with a spear. He fell down dead, and Yoonhee's father stopped. He didn't know what to do now, continued to make his way to the shelter, or return to the car. The man watched in horror as whole hordes of new, terrifying monsters rose from the water across the bridge. Here, one of them grabbed the railing with his clawed paws and was ready to appear right in front of our heroes. Yoonhee realized that what he feared most had happened. The creatures had appeared before his family had managed to get off the bridge. They were Class 7 monsters, divers, but there were so many of them that the number of human casualties increased with every minute. Half-fish with terrible predatory teeth used spears as weapons, although they were quite capable of simply biting off anyone's head. The female player, who specialized in healing, narrowly escaped the attack, but who knows how long she can hold out. The veterans quickly got their bearings and began to repel the attack, covering the advance of the civilians. One of the players was holding a wounded girl in his arms and asked if there were any healers nearby. The woman we had already noticed volunteered to help and ran forward, only a few meters away from the injured girl. But the huntress couldn't overcome them either. The spear of another diver struck the target with lightning speed, and it fell dead. There were so many monsters that the people who found themselves surrounded had practically no chance of survival. The Yoonhee family stood in the middle of this chaos in complete confusion. Right around them, the divers were going wild. A little further away, the Kraken was tearing apart the remains of the bridge with its tentacles. Here, the father asked the children to obey and do what he tells them without hesitation, and he in turn promises to protect them. He ordered his wife and son not to look back and just run forward, and advised his daughter to close her eyes. There was no time to think. They all ran. It was the only chance to survive, but no one could give any guarantees that the attempt would be successful. Just at that moment, a Kraken tentacle flew over them and simply grabbed several cars and their passengers in an armful. The second tentacle repeated the same thing and lifted the cars up, only to then simply throw them off the bridge. The third tentacle destroyed both the bridge and the cars with direct blows, completely unconcerned about how effective such tactics were. Yunha looked at what was happening and realized that his father had not made the best decision. Running forward was too dangerous. The boy tried to call out to his dad, who was moving ahead, clearing the way as best he could, and tell him about it. But the father already understood that he had to stop. With another blow of the tentacle, the Kraken threw the fuel tanker and provoked a powerful explosion. A new fire started. There was practically nothing left of the bridge ahead, and Yunhee's family simply stood there and looked at the wall of flames ahead. It was unclear what to do next, where to go, especially since our heroes simply froze, desperately trying to come up with at least something. The players also didn't know what to do. The road was destroyed. Reinforcements weren't arriving. People only had a couple of minutes to get their bearings. One of them shouted that they had to hold out until reinforcements arrived. The thrones had to arrive and destroy the monsters. Yuna remembered that in his past life, the thrones arrived 30 minutes after the Kraken appeared. Since the escape routes were blocked, all hope lay with the players who were on the bridge now. They could defeat the divers, but if no one destroyed the Kraken soon, everyone would die. Yuna thought that he had been preparing for this from the very beginning. He had to save his family even at the cost of his own life. It was time to act. The boy took a stationary knife and scissors out of his backpack, and his mother became worried, not understanding what he was planning. Our hero asked his parents to stay close to the players and not leave them until help arrived. The father almost shouted to ask what was going on. He was no less worried about his son than the mother, and also did not understand what his restless child was going to do. Yuna said that for now the players are protecting them, but if something else happens, Yuna can help the parents. He explained everything to her earlier. There was so much confidence in the child's voice that his parents did not stop him. Perhaps this was a result of severe stress. Yunha looked at his sister and said that she was the only one present who could use and control mana, so she should only do it when absolutely necessary. The girl was too scared, and also very worried about her brother and did not want to let him go, but she still agreed. The boy did not hesitate, turned around and ran towards the Kraken. His mother only managed to stretch out her hand after him, but could not hold him back. Yunha was determined to kill the monster, save his family, and live a new life, given to him for the second time. He ran between the cars towards the monster with a stationary knife at the ready, but he felt that his speed was not enough. Then our hero decided to use the skill he used as a player. It was not easy in the body of a child, but he managed to use the force and accelerate. It was a heavenly stepping technique, and it was quite difficult for a man in a boy's body, and his strength did not last long. But this way he could instantly reach the Kraken, so Yunha decided not to spare himself and move on. He used his heavenly steps again and leapt from one car to another with huge leaps, as fast as an arrow. People who noticed him were very surprised. Not a single child had ever used the techniques of the players in Korea. The hunters, who noticed the boy, ordered him to stop immediately. It was too dangerous, but our hero did not listen and rushed forward. Even the divers froze in surprise. They hadn't expected anything like this, and Yunhee's speed was so high that they barely had time to notice him. The boy raced across the roofs of cars straight towards the monsters with a stationary knife at the ready. He was ready to attack. Approaching the opponents, Yunha managed to envelop his childish weapon in mana beforehand, and it was no longer so harmless. He took out the first diver with one blow, but the rest of the monsters rushed to help, to take revenge on the reckless child. The knife in our hero's hand worked perfectly, despite his short, childish arms and weak muscles, and his combat skills from his past life were beginning to be restored. One blow was followed by another, and soon the number of defeated divers exceeded 10. The boy moved along the roofs of cars, leaving behind the corpses of monsters. When his path was blocked, a couple of movements of the knife solved the problem, but the battle undoubtedly took a lot of strength from the child. Yunha then decided not to kill the divers, but simply move forward, jumping over them when it was possible to avoid a fight. If this was impossible, the boy would use a knife. Now he had more strength to strike, and the monsters' heads would fly off with one movement of the knife. To move faster, our hero began to dodge attacks, avoiding opponents. He jumped over monsters from above and rolled under them from below. In the same way, Yuna covered the distance between the cars, sometimes jumping, sometimes rolling. His goal was to get to the Kraken as quickly as possible. The knife worked perfectly. The mana reserve was still quite large, and repelling the attacks of monsters was becoming easier and easier. The skills from the past life worked better each time. There was only a little bit left to the tentacles. The road was blocked only by a couple of divers, and Yunha realized that he had almost reached his goal. He swung his knife at another monster and practically cut it in half, just like the adult Yunha destroyed monsters. It was nice to realize that even in a child's body he managed to fully restore his fighting skills. The boy was rapidly moving forward. Our hero remembered that he had previously possessed a special technique that allowed him to speed up and strengthen his blow. He needed to try to use it now, before meeting the Kraken. Yunha tried to concentrate as much as possible and think through a further strategy in order to get rid of all the divers on the way at once. He gathered all his mana into his fingertips and his knife, spun around, and began to act like a whirlwind of blue light. Landing on the ground after a series of blows, the boy assessed the situation and was quite pleased with the result. The diver tried to attack him, hiding below under the debris, but Yunha noticed it in time and jumped high into the air, only to then quickly descend and destroy the enemy before he even realizes what happened. Another monster launched a spear at the boy, but our hero jumped again, avoiding the hit. Having finished with the last diver, Yunha whispered that it took very little time. He became himself again, became immortal again. The guy added that it was time to end all this. The Kraken was very close. All that was left was to overcome the last few dozen meters. Scissors were added to the knife. Our hero began to jump from one roof of the car to another, simultaneously enveloping the additional weapon in mana. Yunha used magical protection on his entire body because he didn't know how strong the enemy was and what to expect from him. The heavenly steps were working even better now. The distance was closing very quickly. Now it was time to use the weapon. The boy stopped in front of the Kraken, and only now did it become clear how tiny Yunha was compared to the monster. The hero thought that he would have to fight with the weapon he had, although it was unlikely to cause significant damage to the monster. There was no choice. At this time, the Kraken raised a tentacle, preparing to crush the person who dared to come close to it. The monster missed by a little, smashing several cars standing between him and Yunha into pieces. The boy could only hope that there were no people inside. There was not a second to lose, and our hero jumped and landed right on the tentacle, digging into the tentacle with a knife and scissors to secure himself. The monster swung its limb and the boy almost fell down, hanging on his simple weapon, stuck in the monster. The main task was to reach the head, so Yunha used heavenly steps again, getting closer to the most vulnerable areas. Having reached his goal, he began to strike blow after blow, hoping that in this way he would be able to cut the thick skin and inflict a more serious wound, delaying time until the arrival of the thrones. A large cut had to be made, and the boy figured out how to achieve this. He climbed onto the top of the head and stuck scissors and a knife deep into the skin. Yunha hung on the weapon and with the weight of his body cut the Kraken's skin in 2 places at once, descending several meters down. It was quite an effective solution. Our hero was glad that he managed to carry out his plan. He wanted to rip the monster open to the very bottom, but he saw in time that a Kraken tentacle was flying straight at him. The boy jumped back to avoid the blow, but that didn't mean the next attack would take a long time to come. Having landed on the ground, Yunha had already begun to think about the tactics of his actions. It was pleasant for him to feel strong and powerful again. True, one of the blades of the scissors remained in the monster's body, but this in no way shook our hero's confidence. Since the weapon resembled a dagger, Yunha again enveloped it in mana and was satisfied with the result. It was possible to attack again. At this time, blows rained down on the hero, but he managed to react quite quickly and did not receive serious damage. Bouncing off another tentacle that fell right on the spot where the boy had just been standing, he began to climb up the Kraken's body again. But another tentacle prevented the hero from carrying out his plan, throwing the boy down like a bug. Yunha was not used to giving up. He climbed onto the Kraken's head again and began to inflict wounds on the monster, putting all his strength and mana into them. In fact, blows of such force did not pass without a trace for the boy. He completely exhausted his body, but in the heat of battle he did not notice this, driven by excitement. Our hero felt like everything was swimming before his eyes, but he didn't pay attention to it. There was no time to feel sorry for himself. The Kraken knocked Yunhu down again with a tentacle strike. The monster clearly didn't like what was happening. He was starting to get angry. The next swing of the tentacle threw the boy so far away that it would have taken him several minutes to reach the Kraken. Our hero rose to his feet, grasping the improvised dagger made from scissors with both hands. He had no intention of stopping. But the monster decided to finally get rid of the annoying enemy, so it launched its next attack on the bridge supports right under the boy's feet. The impact was incredibly strong and smashed the support into pieces, with debris flying like hail in all directions. Yunhei managed to avoid being directly hit by the rocks, but he was now standing on a crumbling piece of the bridge, trying to maintain his balance so as not to fall into the water. Thinking that it was time to finish with this annoying freak, the hero gathered his resolve for a new attack. His mana was already critically low. The boy covered the distance to the whole part of the bridge, closer to the Kraken, in a few jumps, but its tentacles were already ready. They continued to destroy the architectural structure, literally following Yunha on his heels. The boy barely had time to jump away. Climbing over chunks of concrete, our hero sensed that the monster was up to something worse, but there was no time to look back. The Kraken grabbed the truck and prepared to throw it straight at his stubborn opponent. Apparently, that was his plan. The boy hadn't noticed this yet. He was standing and preparing to repel the attack of the monster's other tentacles, which were a little lower and closer. It was only when the truck began to creak from the pressure the monster was putting on it, preparing to pounce, that Yunha noticed the sound. Now the truck is already flying towards the place where the child had just been. Another second, and all that will remain of it will be a wet spot. Our hero collected all the remaining mana on the weapon so that the attack power was maximum. It was not so easy. And yet, by nature, Yunha was a winner. He shouted that now the freak would get what he deserved for everything he had done. Raising his simple weapon above his head, he concentrated a colossal amount of energy on its blade. At the cost of incredible effort, the boy managed to cut the truck flying at him in half with a piece of scissors. Even the thrones were not capable of such a thing. The blow was so strong that Yunha himself almost fell off his feet. Until the very end, he did not believe that he could do something like that as a child. There were only a few meters left until the Kraken's eye, and our hero prepared to strike again. But then everything started swimming before his eyes again. The next moment, the boy realized that he was lying on his side. His eyes were open, but he couldn't even blink. The scissors lay in front of Yunha. A fire was blazing behind him, and he tried with his last effort to at least close his eyes. But he didn't have the strength for that either. His mana was completely exhausted. Thoughts were spinning in my head that I needed to try to move. It couldn't be that the mana would run out so suddenly. The hero thought that if he couldn't get up now and finish what he had started, then everything he had already done was completely in vain. In front of his unblinking eyes, there was only one target, the Kraken. It was so close that it seemed like it would be enough to just reach out and kill it, but Yunhee didn't have the strength to do that. All he managed to do was lift his body a little, using his fist as support, but that only lasted for a second. Our hero tried to get up again. He decided that it was not time to give up yet. It was very difficult, but the boy literally moved forward centimeter by centimeter. The boy, like a mantra, repeated to himself that he needed to go to the end and tried to crawl at least to the piece of scissors that fell nearby. He had a great incentive. Yunha wanted to live, and not just live his second life like the previous one, but spend it with his family. The Kraken's huge tentacle shot into the air. The monster had no intention of stopping halfway. It hovered right above Yunha, only to fall down a moment later and crush the child like an ant. The hero realized that he could die now. He did not have the strength to dodge the blow, but he did not want to die like this. He didn't want to die and prayed to the universe for a miracle to happen, and then he felt that a miracle was really happening. Yuna's arms wrapped around him, and the boy found himself in his sister's arms so quickly that he didn't think about how she had ended up there and that she was also in danger. He simply felt a huge sense of relief. The girl screamed for the Kraken not to dare touch her brother. Her desire to save Yunhu was so strong that a protective glow of mana began to shine around the children. The Kraken's tentacle completed its movement, striking right at the spot where the children were, the glow becoming brighter. Even the divers stopped their attacks and froze in amazement. They had never seen anything like it. Sparks and fragments of the Kraken's tentacle reached all the way to the monsters. Even those who called themselves thrones did not have such a powerful defensive force, at least among those living in those times. The Kraken's blow did not damage the bridge, although it should have broken a huge piece of it, crushing the boy and girl who were hit, but only half of the tentacle remained. Yunha realized that he had survived despite all the predictions. It really was a miracle created by Yuna. A miracle was a gift that allowed one to change the world and its physical laws. In a past life, our hero knew 4 people who were capable of this, including Li Yuan, his faithful partner. When Yuna first saw the mana reserves his sister had, he thought that it would be enough to perform a miracle, but until the last moment, he was not sure of his guesses. Now the miracle happened. The girl hugged her brother, calming him down and repeating that everything would be fine. She saved them both, but she didn't even understand it. The glow of mana did not weaken, and the boy realized that Yuna's magic continued to work. His wounds were healing literally before his eyes. But that was not all. The girl managed to close them with a protective dome, protecting them from new attacks of the Kraken, while all she was interested in was her brother's well-being. Yunha was also worried not for himself, but for his sister. He asked if everything was okay. The creation of a miracle does not pass without a trace. Usually the price for using the gift is very high. Yuna smiled and replied that she felt great. Complaining was completely out of character for her. She was a cheerful and optimistic child. But then the girl felt that not everything was as good as it had first seemed to her. She was very tired. The baby's eyes began to close and she almost fell asleep in her worried brother's arms. The glow began to fade. Looking at Yuna's calm face and the small glow in the area of her heart, our hero realized that she had just enough mana left to sustain life. That was very good. If the price for using the gift of miracle was just mana, then little sister would be fine. Yunha carefully placed the girl on the ground, not believing that everything had worked out so well. Now he would take care of their safety. The wounds healed, the strength was restored, and the boy left Yuna to rest, and he himself decided to finish what he started and fight the Kraken again. He was sure that this time he would manage on his own. There was not much time left before the thrones came, of course, if the future had not changed too much. Yunha surrounded himself with a protective force field and began to gather energy in order to deal significant damage to the monster. The boy was enveloped in a blue glow. He was thinking about how best to attack, while the Kraken lowered the tentacles damaged by Yuna into the water and slowly regenerated. His eyes were filled with malice. The monster did not understand how some bugs managed to repel his attack. Yunha noticed that the Kraken opened its eyes, exposing its most vulnerable spot to attack. Was the monster really so surprised by Yuna's gift? The hero smiled. But then the creature's tentacles shot up, preparing to smear the children. The boy whispered that no one would touch his sister, strengthened the protective field, and prepared mana in his hands to repel the attack. In his past life, our hero used the palms of his hands as weapons, and now, having fully recovered, he had the skills to repeat this technique in the body of a child. Yunha prepared both hands to deflect the Kraken's tentacles. He wanted to protect his little sister at any cost. The boy hit one tentacle, then another. Everything worked as he wanted. The monster's blows did not reach their target. Mana was fully restored. Yunha realized that he was strong enough to last until the coming of the thrones. The future had changed. His family had managed to survive, which meant that now there was no need to defeat the Kraken. It would be enough to simply prevent it from killing himself and Yuna. And with this task, in the state that his sister's magic gave him, Yunha would have easily coped, even without a weapon. About half an hour before this, a traffic jam had formed on the neighboring bridge due to an incident. The leader of one of the clans was riding in one of the cars. The man was angry. He didn't know about the incident yet, so he was simply angry because the flow of cars wasn't moving forward at all. He was yawning out of boredom. He muttered under his breath that long waits were incredibly tiring, and this city with its traffic jams was completely unbearable. The red-haired player accused the driver of choosing this path and accused him of only steering but not pressing the pedals at all. The man leaned back in his seat and said he regretted joining the throne instead of enjoying his vacation. Now he was stuck in traffic, called in to guard the city. He wanted to fight monsters, not mess around with civilians. Perhaps he should resign from the position. Hearing this, the driver laughed nervously. Here they both felt something strange. The driver was also a player, and a pretty good one at that, with an excellent sense of smell, not to mention one of the thrones. "There's a lot of mana here," the driver whispered in amazement. The red-haired man replied that he had noticed it himself. At that moment, his mobile phone rang with an incredibly annoying sound. At first, the hero wanted to smash it, but he held back. Looking at the screen, he realized that he had not held back in vain. It was a message about an attack by a third-level monster, an urgent call to the position. At first, the clan leader was suspicious of the information. He understood that it was almost impossible to get out of the traffic jam and go to the battle. According to the information received, it was necessary to fight with a kraken, a third-level monster. It was quite interesting. The throne's eyes lit up with fire. Now all he cared about was where the monster was and how to get there as quickly as possible. The driver looked back at his boss and thought that there was a monster raging nearby, and he was happy about it. What would people think when they saw such a reaction? The voice on the phone said that the incident happened on Songsan Bridge, but there are currently quite a few players there busy with the evacuation. It is unknown whether they were able to cause any damage to the kraken. Because they are mainly busy with divers, the throne is tasked with neutralizing the main monster. After the voice said that he would soon pick up the red-haired man nearby, he turned off the phone. The next moment, the throne opened the car door and got out of it. He intended to get his weapon out of the trunk as quickly as possible. The driver stopped the Lord of the Blade Clan with his shout. It was at least 2 hours' walk to the scene of the tragedy. The man stretched his legs and said that with such traffic jams, the only way to get to the kraken was on foot. After that, he opened the trunk and took out his famous sword. With such a weapon, he had every chance of defeating the monster. The driver reminded him once again that he simply wouldn't make it on foot in time. It would be simply madness to leave the car in such a situation. The throne looked at him with excitement and said that 30 minutes would be enough for him to cover such a distance. After a few seconds, the throne enveloped itself in such a flow of power that it became completely obvious that his words were true. The man's eyes began to glow. His muscles became stronger. All that was left was to apply acceleration and go to the call. And so he did, rushing between the cars, stuck in traffic like a shining comet with a long tail of light behind him. The drivers of the cars only had time to notice a flash of blue light that flashed past them. The driver of the throne sat behind the wheel and thought that the boss was in his element. All that interested him was the opportunity to defeat the most powerful monster. That's what he was, the Lord of the Blade Clan, the Fire Demon, Kang Hyun Chul, fast as lightning and strong as a hurricane. Half an hour later, he had already scattered the divers around him, burning them with a deadly fire, approaching the site of the disaster. Hyun Chul's speed was very high. The sword, shrouded in flames, cut off the heads of opponents left and right, but the man did not waste time on trifles, making his way to the kraken. He was almost there when he noticed something very strange ahead, something that surprised him greatly. Right in the middle of the bridge, a powerful pillar of magic rose up. Nothing like this should have happened in this place. The throne continued to rush forward, thinking that there should be no one here and now who was capable of something like this. This meant that someone new had appeared in the city, someone equal in power to one of the thrones, but not yet one. Yes, it was Yuna and Yunha. The boy continued to reflect more and more blows of the kraken with the help of his hands. He was already noticeably tired, but he didn't stop, expecting help to arrive any minute. He still had quite a lot of mana left. And help came, relying on his fiery sword. Kang Hyun Chul was rapidly approaching the children. It only took a couple of blows to cut off all the kraken's tentacles threatening Yuna and Yunha. The throne was indeed a very powerful warrior. Our hero breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, he could relax and rest a little after all. It was very difficult to fight in the body of a child. But then the boy recognized the one who had come to their aid. In his past life, he had been well acquainted with the fire demon. The kraken received several blows to the head and eyes. The wound site began to burn with fire. The demon was practically defeated. But the key word here is practically. The monster jumped off the bridge into the water to put out the flames and get a chance to recover. The throne with the flaming sword stood and looked at the huge circles on the water. The children behind him also did not understand whether it was all over or there would be a continuation. The gift of pyrokinetics allowed the throne to freely control fire. In fact, this gift was the reason for the nickname of the fire demon, but the flame was powerless underwater. Until the kraken rose to the surface, Hyun-chul had nothing to do. He looked around. And of course, I noticed the children hugging each other on the remains of the bridge. They looked scared, but completely normal. Taking a closer look, the throne thought that they were just two children, not looking like new players or warriors. There was a huge amount of mana around the girl. Hyun-chul was surprised to realize that the magic he noticed was apparently done by her. The man guessed that the little girl had spent all her mana and lost consciousness, and the boy, who was now hugging her, stood up to defend against the kraken in her place. Kang Hyun-chul smiled carnivorously. He wanted to see what kind of players these kids would grow into. He already considered them as future rivals. But it was impossible to show one's intentions ahead of time. The throne approached the children and waved his hand, promising that he would not cause harm. Squinting his eyes slyly, he thought that at least he wouldn't cause any harm now, and then we'll see. Yunha looked at the fire demon with distrust. He knew what kind of person he was. He knew that he shouldn't be trusted. But at that moment, Hyun-chul was only interested in the monster. He focused all his attention on the kraken. He needed to get rid of it. The head of the Blade clan warned the boy not to come closer and not to interfere. It would be dangerous now. The monster began to rise from under the water. The movement of the tentacles was clearly visible from the bridge, which meant that the monster was not going to run away from the threat and was determined to fight to the end. Our hero remembered what Kang Hyun-chul was like in his past life. When he was already much older, having met the Deathless, the fire demon constantly tried to provoke him. He did this in order to measure his strength and enter into battle, but Yunha tried in every way to prevent this. They first met in the ruins, and the fire demon told our hero that his fame and reputation preceded his appearance. When asked what he wanted, Hyun-chul replied that he just wanted to check if Immortal was as good as others said. The fire demon offered to fight, but Yunha replied that there was no point, and simply asked him to move out of the way so he could pass. Kang Hyun-chul said that they would only be able to pass after they tested their strength. There was no other way. The Immortal exhaled loudly. He didn't want to waste time, but apparently he couldn't avoid the fight. He coated his sword in mana and promised his impudent opponent that he would greatly regret standing in his way. The fire demon was incredibly pleased because he had finally achieved what he wanted. Full of inspiration, he raised his weapon engulfed in flames above his head. But Yunha struck first, received a portion of fire in response, then he delivered a couple more blows, and the fight ended. Now our hero was hugging his sister and looking at the back of the one who had bothered him in his past life and would probably bother him now. Before his regression into a child, Kang Hyun-chul tried to challenge the Immortal to a duel many times, but Yunha never defeated him. The peculiarity of the fire demon was that the stronger the enemy was, the stronger he became after defeating him, and this continued over and over again. He was simply born for battle. Now Hyun-chul peered into the depths and lamented that the kraken had taken a suspiciously long time to appear. Was it really afraid of the little fire? He did not suspect that the monster had its own insidious plan, and it consisted of destroying the bridge supports. Feeling that the columns had stopped holding the road, the throne realized what had happened. But until the bridge collapsed, he continued to stand on his feet. The man shouted at the children not to move, as the creature had destroyed the column and they could all fall down at any moment. Yunha picked up his little sister in his arms so that if anything happened, he could jump away with her to a safe place. And the Blade Lord thought that the presence of children was preventing him from fighting at full strength. He was irritated. However, the bridge did not collapse. Instead of broken columns, it was now supported by two blue pillars of mana. Someone else joined the battle. Kang Hyun-chul looked up and thought that help had arrived just in time to prevent his shoes from getting wet. A helicopter hovered over the bridge, and the throne shouted words of gratitude at the top of its lungs, addressing it. The girl, whom he for some reason called Holy Mother, stood in the doorway and was indignant that she was not yet old enough to be called by such a name. It was one of the 12, Park Hyo-rim. She shouted to her partner that they had offered to take him to the crash site in a helicopter, so why run to the bridge on his own? The man cheerfully raised his finger and said that he urgently needed to get to Seoul. He had a specific sense of humor. The girl asked him to just focus on the Kraken now. Reinforcements were supposed to arrive soon, and then they would deal with the civilians. She cast a protective field on Hyun-chul and also buffed him quite strongly. The man clearly didn't like it. Kang yelled that he didn't need her buffs, but Park Hyo-rim retorted that he was in no position to show off. Following the helicopter as it flew away, the fire demon shouted that these children were now outside his area of responsibility. Yunha hugged his sister closer to him. He was glad that he wouldn't have to deal with his old enemy again. Park Hyo-rim replied to Hyun-chul that she knew and would take care of it. The girl carefully looked at the boy with the girl in his arms. At this time, huge diverging circles appeared on the water surface again. The Kraken slowly rose to the surface. Now his eyes glowing with red fire became visible. Another second, and the tentacles would again begin to destroy everything around. On the bridge in front of the giant monster stood several tiny figures, a boy holding his sister in his arms, and a man who intended to defeat the monster in the next couple of minutes. Joyfully exclaiming that his target was finally accessible again, Kang Hyung-chul rushed forward. He pushed off from the edge of the bridge debris with all his might and jumped straight onto the Kraken's head to deal with it quickly. In the process, the throne became completely engulfed in flames and now looked like a small flame in comparison to the size of the monster. It seemed that the fire demon was now entirely made of flame. There was absolutely nothing human left in his image. He advanced on the Kraken with such determination that the monster did not even risk attacking, but simply froze and watched the enemy. Somehow, Hyun-chul was able to simply walk on the surface of the water without sinking into it. Perhaps the only thing that got wet near the throne was the boots. There were only a few meters left to the Kraken. Finally, the monster came out of its stupor and began to move, raising its giant tentacles for a crushing blow. At that very moment, the throne's sword simply cut off several tentacles at once, saving the owner from having to dodge. A whole ball of flame formed around the fire demon, which also protected him from any attempts by the Kraken to attack. Hyun-chul was pleased with himself and the result of his actions. He understood that victory was almost in his pocket. Calling the monster a weakling, the throne turned into a fiery comet and dealt its first blow to the Kraken's head. He then jumped and cut off a few more of the monster's tentacles, making it difficult to see what exactly was happening because of the fire. Everything was burning, Hyun-chul himself, his clothes, his sword, his footprint. His opponent was also burning, and the latter was actually receiving significant damage from the flames. The Kraken was dying. Its eyes were still open, but instead of an angry red glow, they now showed despair and suffering. The fire demon reduced the amount of flame and placed the sword on his shoulder. He needed to evaluate the result of his actions. The children also looked at the Kraken. Behind the figure of the throne, they could only see that the monster was blazing with fire and that it was seriously wounded. Yunha realized that the Kraken was defeated, and without hiding his joy, told his sister about it. He had truly managed to change the future. Park Hyo-rim ran to the children as fast as she could. The first thing the girl did was call out to the children and ask if everything was okay. The throne slammed her staff onto the asphalt and announced that she would quickly heal their wounds using healing magic. Imagine her surprise when it turned out that neither the boy nor the girl had a single scratch. Yunha looked at the girl with apprehension. He didn't know what to expect from her yet, but just in case he decided to be on guard. Remembering the pillar of light that appeared on the bridge before Hyun-chul arrived, Park Hyo-rim realized that it was most likely a gift of a miracle that completely healed the children's wounds, and she was amazed. Hyo-rim wanted to reach out and touch the girl. She had never seen a miracle or someone who possessed this gift before. Yunha didn't allow her to do this, angrily shouting at the girl not to dare touch his sister. The boy's gaze was full of confidence and strength, completely untypical of an ordinary child, but then he was not ordinary. Hyo-rim felt it. She realized that it wasn't just the girl that was interesting. The boy had no less potential. No one had threatened her so openly for a long time. The girl did not expect that the child could threaten like that, and began to wonder who he was. It was not possible to get an answer right away. Helicopters appeared, which meant that the children would be immediately evacuated from the bridge to the hospital. Pak received a message that a rescue team was ready to lift the boy and girl on board. It was dangerous to remain on the bridge. Yunha felt a huge sense of relief. For some reason, when communicating with the thrones, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was putting himself and his sister in danger. The TV news announcer announced that around 5 p.m., a kraken had suddenly attacked the Seongsan Bridge, causing many casualties among civilians and players. The presenter added that search and debris removal are still ongoing, so it is not yet possible to give the exact number of dead and injured. The government commented on the tragedy, but Yunha did not listen any further. He was in the hospital and waiting for information about his sister's condition. The hero was also interested in what was going on with his parents, but Yuna was still little, and therefore he had to worry about her first and foremost. The girl was lying on the bed, dressed in a hospital gown. Her eyes were closed, her eyelids trembling slightly. A nurse came up and said that the doctor assessed the child's condition as stable. She had a mana deficiency, but after using the potion, everything would return to normal quite quickly. The boy remembered how it was the last time, when his dad, mom, and sister did not survive. Perhaps it was his worst memory. Now Yunha was practically happy. He changed the future, everything ended well, Yuna did not die, and apparently, her parents did not either. The boy put his hand to Yuna's forehead. It was no longer as cold as on the bridge. The girl's strength was gradually returning. The potion began to work. Then the boy heard someone call his name. He tensed up. There was a lot of anxiety and fear in his voice. He didn't need to look back. It was his father. He was angry and worried at the same time. Such a tone did not bode well. But Yunha still turned around and saw how the parents quickly but carefully walked into Yuna's room. Their faces were frightened. The father was ready to start screaming out of anger at his son's recklessness. He was holding back with all his might. His lips were trembling. The mother tried to calm her husband down a little. Yunha realized that a huge scandal could break out now. If it weren't for Yuna, who was sleeping, he would have received a hefty scolding. The boy decided that he was finished. He lowered his head and prepared to listen to reproaches and lectures from his parents. Instead, his mother asked him in an anxious voice if he was hurt, how he was feeling, and if he was very scared. The boy timidly muttered that everything seemed to be fine with him. He was afraid to raise his eyes to his parents. Father asked what was wrong with Yuna, and no Yunha replied that she had too little mana left, but the doctors had already corrected it by using the necessary potion, and now the little sister was sleeping. The father sighed with relief. It seemed as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The boy continued to stand with his head down. He braced himself for what was inevitable, and then his father reproachfully asked why Yunha had disobeyed him and his mother and run away. The boy could not think of anything better to do than simply ask for forgiveness. He understood that in the eyes of his parents he was very guilty before them and Yuna. But then Yunhu had a thought. Is an apology really necessary? After all, he saved his family. This is the best outcome that could possibly happen. Our hero thought that he didn't regret at all that he disobeyed. The boy smiled at this thought. The main thing is that his father doesn't notice it. The parents continued to look menacingly at their son, and he pretended that he was really very guilty. Since you are in the body of a child, you need to behave like a child. But then our hero looked closely at his father again. He was so worried about his children that he seemed to have aged 15 years. Looking at his mother, Yunha noted that exactly the same thing had happened to her. The young woman looked deeply tormented by her experiences. Now the boy understood how much health his prank cost his parents, because they did not know that he was living a second life and saved them from certain death. The hero realized that the only thing his parents cared about was that their son had disobeyed and run towards the kraken, putting himself in danger. He knew exactly what it was like to lose his family, so he didn't hesitate for a second and didn't ask their opinion. Now he had to become a child again, so Yunha looked at his father, cried, and asked for forgiveness. The boy added that he was wrong, fully aware of it and promising never to do anything like that again. No one yelled or scolded him. The mother stretched out her arms to her son and invited him into her gentle and affectionate embrace. Yunha threw himself on her neck and was happier than he had ever been in his life, both in this life and in the previous one. Could the future really be happy this time? The hero couldn't believe his happiness. The father also hugged him and his wife. He quickly calmed down, because he loved Yunhu very much, so he simply asked her never to do that again. Yunha started to cry for real. He didn't have to fight monsters anymore. He could be an ordinary child. The next morning, Yunhee's family returned to the hospital to take Yuna home. The girl had already completely recovered. The father asked the boy in a stern voice to sit in the room and not go anywhere while he and his mother filled out all the necessary paperwork. Yuna raised his hand happily and promised that he would wait for them by Yuna's bed without moving from the spot. Our hero thought that after the events on the bridge, his parents had completely stopped trusting him, and he wished it would end soon. Yuna continued to sleep. Her eyes were still closed, but a blush had already appeared on her cheeks. Yunha sat next to his sister's bed and ate cookies. These were the simple childhood joys that he had previously lacked so much. Having finished the last piece, the boy even wanted to lick his finger. It was very tasty, but the treat was too small. Looking around, our hero was convinced that there was nothing else tasty in the ward. He desperately wanted something sweet, probably because he had spent a lot of energy the previous day. Then someone handed him another chocolate chip cookie, and Yunha was delighted. He thanked them with all his heart for the treat. But then the hero looked at who was holding out the cookies. It was Kang Hyun-chul. For some reason, the boy suddenly lost his desire for sweets. Raising his hands in a questioning gesture, Yunha seemed to be asking what the throne had forgotten in his sister's chamber and why he was treating him. The man began to remove the wrapper. He did not understand why the child did not take the sweet and asked if he liked chocolate cookies. The next moment, the head of the Blade clan simply shoved the treat straight into Yunha's mouth. He rarely dealt with children at all, so he simply didn't know how to behave. Our hero held the cookie in his teeth and thought that his enemy from his past life was probably dying. Or maybe he had gone crazy. No, he had always been crazy. But how to explain such behavior? Here the man decided to break the silence once again and asked how old Yunhei was. He spoke to him in a serious tone, as if he were an adult. The boy finally took the cookie in his hand and began to eat it. After chewing a piece, he replied that he had recently turned 6. The throne exhaled that the child turned out to be really, really small and asked how old his sister was. Yunha answered that it was 10. Hyun-chul asked about his name, and our hero was indignant that he was not obliged to tell him his sister's name. The man laughed and said that he was not interested in the girl's name, but in the name of the boy with whom he now had the honor of speaking. But Yunha introduced himself. He did not understand what all these questions were for and what the fire demon wanted. But soon, everything became clear. The Blade Lord asked if no Yunha wanted to join the Player Academy in the future. If so, he could confidently count on his recommendation. Yunha was horrified. This guy wanted to put him in the academy to make him a player and then measure his strength. Did he decide to grow his own opponents? The hero thought. The man put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said that he still had plenty of time to think. Hyun-chul smiled and said that he would definitely remember the hero, no Yunha. He was almost sure that they would meet again. The throne turned around and left the chamber. Park Hyo-rim was waiting for him at the door. She realized that they had failed to agree on admission to the academy. The girl pounced on her colleague with questions about how he could just turn around and leave. She was almost certain that one of the children had the gift of miracles, a gift no one had had for many years. Hyun-chul replied that he didn't care much about that. It only mattered whether the children were strong or not. Hyerim called him an idiot who was obsessed with fighting, but the man pretended not to hear. He turned and reminded her that she must not forget that firstly, he was older, and secondly, she had become the throne, and now she must think very carefully about her words and actions. Hyun-chul added that if the child really does have the gift of a miracle, the girl's life will turn into a living hell when the general public finds out about it, so there is no point in ruining her life at such a young age. The man looked closely into Park Hyo-rim's eyes and asked if she wanted this. The girl realized that she had spoken too quickly and remained silent. Continuing to walk down the corridor, the throne summed up that if she understood him, then she should forget about all this, after which he suggested going to a cafe and ordering dessert. The beauty instantly imagined a carousel of ice cream, burgers, and candies. She herself wanted to have some refreshment, but the moment was not particularly suitable. Hyerim again called her friend crazy. Hyun-chul ordered once again to forget about the girl. At least for a few years, it was much better to go and eat than to say anything. Before leaving the hospital, the man muttered under his breath that he really wanted something sweet. He had spent a lot of energy yesterday. The next day, after being discharged from the hospital, Yoonhee's family finally went to visit her grandmother, who lived in a small village a few hours' drive from the city. The old woman met them at the door of the house, which raised alarming questions about whether she could go out after fainting. The grandmother smiled and said that she came out only to meet them. She was very impatient to see her grandchildren. She looked at her daughter, her husband, and children, and was upset to see that they looked worn out and tired. Yoonha and Yoona were sleeping in the back seat and didn't even wake up. The woman suggested that they continue to rest, but in the house. But Yoonha opened his eyes and realized that he was no longer sleeping in the car, but under the blanket. Yoona pressed tightly against him, hugging her little brother in her sleep. Our hero was so tightly squeezed by loving embraces that he was afraid to even move, so as not to wake the girl. But the boy still couldn't sleep in that position. He carefully rolled his sister a little to the side and sat down, wondering how she could even sleep in such an uncomfortable position. Then he looked at how his mother hugged his father just as tightly in her sleep and realized who Yoona took after. Yoonha stood up carefully and covered Yoona with a blanket so that she wouldn't freeze. He was wide awake. The boy quietly tiptoed out of the room, trying not to wake anyone, and then closed the door. He went out into the yard. The nature in this area was extremely beautiful and peaceful, giving a feeling of peace. Our hero sat down and tried to collect his thoughts. His feelings were quite strange, but Yoonha noticed that he now had much more mana than he had in his previous life. He wondered if it was related to his gift, because as a player he was very strong and, one might say, unique. It is rare for someone to have the gift of a berserker, but Yoonha has mastered it to perfection. One cannot say that it was because of a good life, but rather from a burning desire to take revenge on the monsters for his family. At that time, the pattern was simple. The more mana he consumed, the stronger he became, but he could not accumulate energy in large quantities, turning everything into strength. The strength was great. Our hero cut down monsters literally with one blow, rarely requiring an additional one. The name itself suggested that his gift caused a real obsession with battle. The more mana the player consumed, the more insane he became. Yoonha thought about how, despite the peculiarities of his gift, when he used adult skills in a child's body, his mind remained completely clear. He fought the Kraken. He even cut through a truck flying at him, but he didn't experience the rage that usually overwhelmed him in battles before the regression. If now this payment for the gift is missing, then perhaps he still doesn't know everything he should about berserkers. Then he heard a gentle voice. The grandmother was asking why the boy was not sleeping, but Yoonha did not even notice when she approached. The woman sat down next to her grandson and smiled warmly at him. She was still as loving and caring as the hero remembered her. He replied that he had slept well in the car, to which he received advice to sleep well if he wanted to grow up faster. Yoonha thought that every time he was lost in thought in his past life, he imagined his grandmother next to him. And now she's sitting next to him again, waiting for her grandson to start the conversation first. If he wants to, it doesn't matter to her whether it's about problems, about feelings, or just about some nonsense. The boy looked tenderly at his grandmother and asked why she herself didn't sleep. Because when you're sick, you also need rest. The woman laughed and simply said that if he couldn't sleep, she couldn't either. Yoonha snorted. It was true. That's how it always happened. Then a very pleasant thought struck him. Our hero smiled and felt happy again. As an adult, he always wanted his grandmother to be around, and it seems like in his new life, there's a chance that it will be like that if his parents take better care of her now. The woman looked at her grandson and asked if he wanted some warm milk. The boy waved his hands. Refusing, Yoonha did not want to cause her trouble. Here he heard a clarifying question. Whether he really didn't want it, it was his mother, who quietly woke up, warmed up the milk, and brought it into the yard. She pointed at the cups and asked with a smile who would then drink what she had prepared. Yoonha gratefully took the cup and took his first sip. At that moment, he felt like the happiest child on the planet. The mother and daughter began to communicate. The neighbor's call seriously alarmed the whole family, but the grandmother assured that this woman was prone to exaggeration. Yoonhee's mother said that fainting was no joke. She was very scared. The woman seemed embarrassed for panicking a little. The boy assumed that his grandmother had simply slipped slightly, and they were all lucky that there were no serious injuries. The woman explained that she tripped on the stairs because she was a little distracted and had a vision. She added that, as she was climbing the steps, it seemed to her that her deceased husband was standing in front of her. This had happened before. Yunhee's mother sighed reproachfully, but the old woman objected that she was not yet senile and wanted to tell the whole story. The grandmother added that her husband stood at the top of the steps, waving both hands and saying that there was no need to go up. Now she believes that the message was not meant for her, but for Yunhee, whose parents told her about the incident with the kraken. The boy's mother thought about it. There was something in it. Yunhee himself also decided that, given the circumstances, it really could have been a warning. He remembered the kraken and decided that it was unlikely to be just his grandmother's fantasy. If his plan had failed, the family would have died, just like his grandfather once did. The boy remembered the fear of his father, who was holding Yuna in his arms, and the fright of his mother, who did not know how to save the children, and he felt uneasy. The hero thought that if grandfather really came to his grandmother with a warning, then she should have told him about it earlier. His thoughts were all in a tangle. Everything seemed too complicated. The old woman began to remember the past. She looked at the sky and said that on the day of the first vision, the weather was wonderful. Grandfather said that there was a beautiful fawn near the house. She went out into the yard to look, and there was Yunhee. Grandmother ruffled her grandson's hair. The boy's mother asked again whether the grandfather had spoken specifically about a fawn. The woman nodded and asked what was wrong with that. The daughter explained that she had recently seen a similar dream, as if her father had left a fawn near their house, and the old woman gasped. She looked at her daughter carefully with a silent question, but she shook her head and waved her hands, denying everything. Yunhee drank milk and did not understand anything at all. To change the subject and distract her son, the mother asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, a completely unexpected question. The boy moved the cup of milk away from his mouth and thought, for some reason in his past life, he always knew that he would become a gambler in order to take revenge, but now he never thought about it. The hero was overwhelmed by a vision of some dying people, or maybe demons, who were begging for help. He did not understand what this could mean. One of the screamer's hands landed on Yunhee's shoulder, and the boy literally felt the pressure of the fingers. His eyes widened in horror. But it was the hand of the mother, who noticed her son's fear and excitedly asked if everything was okay with him. Yunhee looked back once more to make sure that there was no one behind him and that he had simply imagined all of this. The boy looked at his mother and said that everything was fine. He just hadn't decided yet what he wanted to become and what profession to choose. The woman replied that this was completely normal. At such a young age, few people know what the future holds. Grandma smiled and also said that he was still too young to make such a difficult choice. There was no need to rush at all. She looked at the mountains illuminated by the sun's rays and advised her grandson to simply live through the happy and difficult moments, make friends, and quarrel with them. According to her, one must study and play diligently, and in the end it will become clear what he likes. The boy listened attentively. Grandma smiled and finished by saying that the future will be whatever he chooses for himself. It's a long road. Our hero couldn't believe his ears. It seemed like he had just been advised to just live, be happy, and appreciate this opportunity. The women hugged him lovingly, and his mother confirmed that what her grandmother said was absolutely true. Yunhee could do anything. He would achieve everything he wanted. Mom told our hero something he didn't know before. His name means a universe with infinite power. She looked tenderly at her son and said that she would always be proud of him, no matter what path the boy chose in his life. Grandma added that she was also always ready to support him. Yunhee was so touched that he almost cried. Then they heard a loud ouch on the steps. It was Yuna, wrapped in a blanket, who declared that she also wanted some milk. The grandmother laughed and called her to join them quickly, and the next moment the girl was already sitting down next to her. Yunhee listened with joy as the woman offered her granddaughter her glass, and the girl didn't even try to pretend that she was embarrassed to drink someone else's milk. Here, the boy realized that he had forgotten something very important to him. He had a chance to correct the mistake made in his past life. He ran into the house, quietly took the paper carnations prepared for the holiday out of his backpack, and gave them to his grandmother, something he had never done before. The woman was very happy and said that she would definitely put them on the nightstand in the hallway so that everyone could see the gift right away. The grandmother was very touched. She wanted to brag to all her friends that her grandson had made origami especially for her. Yunha's mother said that the gift was prepared in advance, and Yunha really wanted to go to his grandmother to give it to her in person. Our hero watched his loved ones rejoice and thought that he wanted to create more pleasant moments for them in this life. Both his mother, grandmother, and sister burst into laughter on a warm, fine day. It seemed that this was exactly what Yunha had dreamed of for many years. He was kind and somewhat sentimental at heart, largely thanks to his grandmother, who raised the boy after the death of his parents. He mentally thanked her for this. By evening, No Yunhee's family returned to their home. The entire building was beautifully illuminated by the rays of the setting sun. Everyone gathered for dinner. Dad happily hugged Mom. It was obvious that they wanted to say something to the children, but couldn't decide. Yuna and Yunha looked questioningly at their parents, and they finally told them the news. Their family was expecting a new addition soon. The girl rushed to her mom and dad with hugs, screaming that she couldn't believe that she would soon have another brother or sister. Yunha stood with his head down and was in no hurry to join his sister. His mother was afraid that the news did not please him at all. It seemed like the boy was about to cry and the rice in the plate would become even saltier, but the mother walked up to her son and hugged him tenderly. Yunha looked up at her with tear-filled eyes and repeated thank you several times. He was just happy that his mother loved him and that they would have another child. The boy kept hugging his family and, as if repeating a mantra, thanked them. This was the best thing that had happened to him in his life, the happiest day. Dad smiled, a little embarrassed, joking that Yunhee's reaction was so strong that people would think he was the father. Everyone laughed, and the boy too. He quickly wiped away his tears so as not to upset anyone. They still needed to have dinner. Sometime after the holidays, our hero returned to his kindergarten doan, and the usual boring everyday life began. However, they were not always boring. One day the children played a family in which a pet appeared, a dog. The girls called him Pochi and invited him to eat from a bowl. It's hard to believe, but the teacher assigned the role of the puppy to Yunhei, who, out of desperation, even barked to match the image, and he had furry ears on his head. The girls surrounded the dog and began to pet him, feel sorry for him, and say that now he has a home and an owner, the puppy will be warm and fed. Our hero almost cried from anger, but he endured it. After all, in kindergarten, one had to behave appropriately and obey the teacher. Then the Drin Minji approached the children with a cup in her hand and said that she didn't understand at all why the girls thought this Pochi was cute, some kind of mangy dog. She sat down at the table and declared that the best solution would be to simply throw out this mongrel. Yunha was so angry that he was ready to bite the offender. Minji said that there was no point in barking at her, otherwise everything would be reported to the teacher. Our hero pretended to be very afraid and pitifully raised his paw. The idea to make Yunhu a dog came to the teacher when he caught the boy sleeping under the table. It was a kind of joke. He carried the sleeping child into a pet bag and invited the girls to play with their new pet. While Minji was finishing her tea, a boy who pretended to be a father who had returned from the store approached the children. Yunha took advantage of the fact that everyone was distracted and decided to run away to another room. While the girls were trying to find out if all the purchases were good, our hero quietly crept up to the door and no one noticed him. Finally able to take off the stupid ears and do something of his own choosing, Yunha was extremely angry at the teacher. He walked into the reading room and, as expected, he saw Yang Haiyan there. It was a pleasant meeting. The girl was again with her pink ribbon, but this time tied differently. She did not smile, but was also glad to see Yunhu. The boy came closer and asked her what she was reading. Her friend replied that she was reading Sherlock Holmes. She had been literally obsessed with it lately. Yuna tried to remember the book. He had read it too, so he muttered that it was the story where Sherlock and Moriarty fell off the waterfall at the end and died. The girl didn't expect him to know the plot, and even more so, she didn't count on such a big spoiler. Her eyes widened. Our hero realized that he had made a mistake. Now John would not get any pleasure from the book. Well, how annoying it turned out. The girl was very upset. She almost cried and said that no Yunha was very angry, to which the boy said that it was okay. Her favorite character would appear again in The Return of Sherlock Holmes. This was the last straw. Yan Haiyan blushed with anger and resentment. It seems that the children still couldn't become good friends. The little girl, once again, with tears in her voice, accused our hero of being very evil. The guy was ashamed, he apologized, but never received forgiveness. Uni had to go back to the playroom again. The children had already forgotten about playing house. Without the teacher's supervision, they had a more fun pastime. The boys had a sword fight. One had just defeated the other, and was proudly announcing that the blood had not been shed in vain, but in the name of the crown. The winner was Yong-hook. He noticed Yun-hoo approaching the audience, and said that he came just in time. The children decided to find out who was the strongest boy in their group, but so far no one had managed to defeat Yon-hook. The guys around started chanting the names of the next participants in the fight. Our hero thought that they had been watching too many TV shows. Yunha was not eager to fight, because he knew that he was much stronger than the boy, but the crowd continued to demand that he raise his sword. Yon-hook just then joyfully pulled his plastic blade out of its sheath, making a characteristic sound. The boy pointed his sword towards his enemy and said in a pompous tone that this city was too small for the two of them. After a moment of silence, Yong-hook added that Yunhee's fate would end right here and now, and he must take up the sword and die with honor. Friends began to egg Yon-hook on to win with one blow and prove that he alone here is worthy of the title of warrior. Our hero thought that he was already starting to get tired of all this. The boys shouted that no Yunha should get what he deserved, that the girls loved him too much, and that no one needed such a rival. But the last straw for his patience was the appearance of Minji, who screamed no Yunhee's name louder than anyone else. And then she gestured that he should remain headless and die on the spot. This was too much. Our hero got angry, but he was sad. No one, absolutely none of the children were rooting for him. It was strange to be left completely without support. The boy looked around the crowd of children with hope and saw Yang Haiyan. He smiled, expecting the girl to be on his side. But she, with tears in her voice, clutching the book to her chest, screamed that she hated him. But Yun-hoo, well, he should have thought about what he was saying. Our hero realized that he had to go through life alone, raised his sword and whispered that the offenders were finished. They would get what they deserved. The boys felt like gladiators in the arena or something like that, the spectators chanting their names and stamping their feet. With his eyes shining, Yong-hook gave the command to begin. He was eager to start a fight with Yunha. The boy ran up and raised his plastic sword to strike from the side. The opponent stood still and did not move. The next moment their swords crossed. If they had been made of metal, sparks would have flown in clusters. After repelling the attack, Yunha began an offensive. His opponent became frightened, took a step back, lost his balance and began to fall. At the last moment, Yong-hook regained his balance and straightened up, but Yunha took advantage of the hesitation and knocked the sword out of his hands. Then Yunha slipped behind his opponent, pushing him. He was so fast that few were able to appreciate this unexpected maneuver. Our hero threw his sword over Yong-hook. It was quite impressive. The weapons seemed to cross in the air. The boy landed on his knees, but said that he was not giving up yet and intended to continue the fight. Yunha pretended to sheath his sword, as if to indicate that there would be no continuation. Yong-hook groaned that he wanted to fight some more now that he had released his hidden secret powers, but then added that it was probably forbidden in the garden. He fell theatrically to the floor, coughing as if he was dying and holding the place where he had been hit with his hand. If he was going to lose, he might as well lose in style. Yunha stood and listened to the applause. The children shouted his name in different voices. Being a winner in childhood was much more pleasant than in adulthood, and there was less bloodshed. Our hero looked back at the cheering crowd and thought that it was a good fight, the best fight, because no one was hurt. The children continued to praise the boy. They remembered how well he plays for the family, and how skillfully he handles the ball, and how good he is at handicrafts. But then someone remembered Excalibur, the stuck sword, and began actively offering Yunhei to pull it out. Our hero did not understand what they were talking about. It was a sword, stuck in a mountain of toys and domino pieces, wrapped in chains. None of the children in the group could get it. All the guys were shouting that they had never seen anyone lift Excalibur before. Yunha should be the first. Our hero thought that it would be impolite to refuse in this situation. The boy confidently took hold of the weapon's handle, For some reason, he was very pleased with himself. It had been a long time since he had felt so pleasant in the garden. Yunhee had to put in some effort to pull out the sword, but he still managed to do so, and the blade shot up into the sky. The children gave another round of applause, shouting that No Yunha was the best, the strongest, and overall incredibly wonderful. The weather was good, so the children in the kindergarten were told to get ready for a walk in the nearby park. The park was beautiful, lots of greenery and neat alleys. Not far from the lamppost under a bench there was someone's phone. It was a little strange. If you looked closely, you could see drops of blood and cracks on the screen, which was showing a news report about an emergency in the city, and 7th-level goblins were discovered. The children from the kindergarten were playing on the playground. They didn't yet know that the players had neutralized all the monsters except for 2, who had managed to blend into the crowd. Minji and her friend were playing Freeze and Dead. They were having fun. Nothing reminded them of a possible threat. Yunha did not take part in the game. He was already quite tired after the first half hour, and now he was trying to rest a little and watched what was happening. Our hero did not understand at all where the children got so much energy from. He remembered himself at their age and did not remember having to run and jump so much. He folded his hands in a pose that helped accumulate mana. He needed to quickly restore his strength. After returning, No Yunha tried to use every opportunity to accumulate as much mana as possible. In his past life, he often suffered from a mana deficiency. During the incident on the bridge, he noticed that he could now accumulate more and already knew that in a few years, people would begin to see mana as having great power and value. He didn't manage to do his job for long. The guys came running and invited him to take part in the game. Yunha thought again that their endurance was simply incredible. Then the teacher came. He went to the nearest supermarket and now brought a whole bag of ice cream for the children. The boys and girls rushed towards him as fast as they could, each wanting to have time to choose the treat that they liked the most. But Yunha looked at them and thought that after all, they were children, and so they behaved accordingly. There was nothing surprising about it. The teacher noticed that the boy was in no hurry to take the treat, so he loudly said that everyone who had not yet had time to come up. There was still quite a lot of ice cream. Our hero put his hand in the bag and chose the most attractive pack. Someone grabbed it from the other side. It's not hard to guess that it was Drin Minji. She always provoked Yunhu in order to then accuse and stir up a scandal. Our hero asked the girl to give him the ice cream. He took it first, but she said that this was not so, and he should give in. Minji accused the boy of being greedy and petty, and he didn't understand why he had to give up the ice cream he chose. The teacher listened, but didn't intervene yet. Finally, his nerves gave out, and the teacher simply took the treats away from both children and reminded them that they should be friends and share. The wisest decision was to split the treat in half, which is what the teacher did, but it can't be said that this made Yunhu and Minji happy. The children each took their half, but they had no intention of putting up with this situation. They decided to do it their own way. To determine the winner who would get all the ice cream, Minji and Yunha started playing rock, paper, scissors. Teacher Tayo didn't like this idea because he asked the children to share, so he had to abandon this idea. Then Yan Hayan came up and asked if the teacher knew where Yeonhook was. He still hadn't gotten any ice cream. Tayo replied that he hadn't seen him for a long time. Most likely the mischievous fellow, as usual, was waving his sword somewhere in the garden. Minji nodded in agreement. At this point, they all looked at Yunhu and began to discuss why both boys liked to play alone so much. Yunha ate his ice cream and thought about how special training should be done in secret. In the background, he could hear the girls talking. Yang Hye Yeon wanted to take the treat to Yeonhook. Minji told her friend that if he wanted, the boy would come himself, to which the little girl replied that she was sad that he was somewhere alone and left without sweets. Drin Minji laughed and said that Yang Hayan only had one flaw: she was too cute. Teacher Tayo heard their conversation and was happy. He gave the girl some ice cream to take to Yeonhook. Her friend offered to keep her company, but Hayan smiled and replied that she could handle the task on her own. Yunho watched her happily run into the garden and thought that Yang was a very good girl, while Tayo was collecting wrappers from those who had already finished eating. Our hero couldn't shake off the feeling that some kind of danger was approaching them, but for now it was too vague. The children started playing Freeze and Dead again, and one of them persistently called for Yunhu to join them as soon as possible. Minji ran to her friends, and on the way she also called the boy to play. He replied that he was tired, and in general, he had enough running around for today. The girl took a pose and replied that in that case no one would want to play with him anymore, but Yunha assured her that she didn't have to worry about that. Despite the fact that the boy refused and suggested that Minji join the children herself, she insisted, citing the fact that Yuna had asked her about it in the morning. The hero remembered his family, and his mood changed. It was very pleasant to think that his sister was caring even from a distance. Minji dragged him to the children, and Yunha did not resist. The children played rock, paper, scissors to decide who would drive. This was a proven and quick method, and besides, no one was offended. Yunha predictably lost, and everyone ran in different directions to avoid being caught by the driver in the first seconds of the game. Our hero didn't like children's entertainment, and besides, he had already run around a lot, so he was in no hurry to catch up with the others. Since it was Minji who had drawn him into this venture, he decided that if he caught the girl and handed over his role to her, he could easily get away. However, catching up with her turned out to be not so easy. Every time Yunha was about to grab the girl, she managed to slip out from under his hand. When he finally succeeded, Minji turned around sharply and ordered our hero to freeze, that is, to freeze. As they continued playing, Yunha decided it would be easier to catch someone else and began chasing the boy in the white and yellow t-shirt. It turned out to be much easier, and now the goal was close. It was possible to calmly leave the site and continue to accumulate mana. The only thing left to do was to take revenge on Minji, who continued to pretend that she was better than all the children and was always right. The girl realized that something unexpected was about to happen, but Yuna pretended that he just wanted to run past. But as soon as he approached, he froze Minji. Now she had no right to move according to the rules of the game. Yunha did it unexpectedly, from behind his back and practically at the last moment. Who could have expected such treachery from him? Minji was really angry, but all was not lost until the one who was driving caught up with her. The girl hoped that this would not happen. Then the boy in the white and yellow t-shirt, who was now supposed to be catching up with the children in place of Yunhee, rushed straight to her and handed over his role. They made a good team with Yunha. The children ran away from Minji, who now had to catch up. The girl was beside herself with anger. Her eyes were burning with fire, and threats and curses were raining down on our hero. She froze, ready to pounce on Yunhu at any moment, telling the boy that he was dead. But Yunha looked back and laughed, teasing Minji that she would never be able to keep up with him. The next second, the girl touched his shoulder, telling him that Yunha was now driving again, and he didn't even understand how she managed to develop such speed. Our hero was distracted by something strange. He froze in place, listening to his own feelings. Minji asked what happened. Yunha used the mana aura and realized that there was someone on the playground, emitting such a strong killing intent that he could sense it. It was a goblin. In his past life, no Yuna had encountered similar monsters many times and recognized them by the energy in space, even without seeing them with his own eyes. In this case, literally 1 second passed from the moment the hero sensed the goblin and saw him. The other children also did not leave the appearance of the monster unnoticed, and now looked in horror at the huge figure that appeared from behind the trees. Eyes were glowing. It would have been easy for him to step over the fence of the playground and simply crush the children. Or even worse. The monster took a few steps forward. They had to run away from it quickly, but in the kindergarten the children felt safe. They were not ready for something like this. The girl closest to the goblin could only shrug her shoulders and remember her mother, who, unfortunately, was not there. Sharp claws and teeth, and a huge axe to boot, hung right over the little girl, and it seemed like nothing could save her. The monster prepared to strike and had already swung its weapon, which cut through the air with a whistle. The girl sat down on the ground, avoiding the blow, and looked pitifully at the offender, who froze for a few seconds, wondering why the blow had not reached its target. The goblin's thought processes were not particularly intense, and without thinking twice, he decided to simply swing and hit again. The little girl had practically no chance of saving herself, but our hero came to her aid, using almost all of his accumulated mana reserves. Yunha directed a stream of power at the monster's clawed fingers, and the axe literally flew out of his hand. The goblin's face reflected bewilderment. This had never happened to him before. The enemy was not visible, but he managed to repel the attack. Yunha's first strike was simply a stream of power from his hand, and for the next one he prepared an ice cream stick, which he enveloped in mana. The boy did not take into account that the goblin was not alone. He barely had time to notice that a second goblin with the same huge axe was rushing at him from behind. The hero managed to dodge in time and then jumped to the side several times. So intensely, the goblin in the helmet made of a skull with horns swung his heavy weapon. Yunha sighed. He was already pretty tired of running around the playground with the kids, and now he had to jump with a monster. The boy decided that he needed to quickly finish with this enemy, and then he needed to take care of the rest of the children. He squeezed his wand tighter, preparing to attack. The boy ducked under the axe and swung to deliver a slashing blow to his opponent's stomach. At this time, someone's footsteps were heard. It seemed that Teacher Tayo had come running to save the children. He heroically rushed at the second goblin, hitting him with a brush for sweeping paths with all his might, saying that the monster would not just walk around the garden. Swinging the cleaning lady's props for another blow, the teacher shouted at Yunhei not to do anything stupid and just stand still. He was a brave man. Tayo threw his brush with all his might right at the goblin our hero was fighting. The boy thought that he was very cool and really loved children. The blow landed with the bristles in the stomach, and therefore was not very strong, but it managed to puzzle the goblin and stop his attack. A second later, the teacher pulled Yunhu by the shirt to bring him closer to himself. He had to act very quickly. Grabbing the girl and our hero in his arms, Tayo ran as fast as he could towards the kindergarten building to take the children to shelter. The goblins tried to run after them, but they were rather clumsy and slow. The teacher turned out to be surprisingly strong and fast, or maybe it was the survival instinct that kicked in. He rushed with 2 children at the ready and even managed to check with them if everything was okay. The helmetless goblin decided that running was not efficient enough and too labor-intensive, so he jumped after Tayo, swinging his axe. Yunha realized that they were all doomed if nothing was done, so he began gathering mana in his hands to attack the monster with a power strike. The boy whispered to the goblin that he had a surprise prepared, gathering the maximum amount of energy and preparing to hit the target. He launched a stream of power at the monster with such force that the recoil even accelerated the teacher's forward movement. The goblin screamed, spread his arms, and released the weapon. It was very painful for him. His internal organs were damaged, as our hero was hit right in the stomach. Because the monster was in mid-air when the blow struck, it fell from a height straight onto its horned partner. Yunha, hanging from the shoulder of the teacher Tayo, assessed his counterattack and was quite satisfied. In his previous life, he had not been able to work so well with mana. The boy entered the kindergarten doors on his own 2 feet, and the teacher ran after the hero with a girl on his back. He was all drenched in sweat. The man fell backwards onto the floor, trying to catch his breath. He was not used to such physical exertion and was completely exhausted. The children became worried. The woman, the school principal, leaned over him and said that she had called the players, but when they would arrive, it was difficult to say. All the children had to be evacuated. The teacher asked if the monsters were goblins. He had never encountered them. The principal replied that yes, they were the 2 goblins that were reported on the news. Yunha began to look around. You need to hold out until help arrives, but before that, you need to make sure that all the children from the street have made it into the building. If so, it wouldn't hurt to barricade the doors. Then Minji, with tears in her voice, screamed that Yang Hyang and Yonghook were nowhere to be found, and the girl began to panic. The teacher and the principal screamed loudly in horror, and Minji explained that she had just seen them in the garden with ice cream. Tayo slowly said that he would go out now and come back for the children. The director objected that, given the circumstances, he would not be able to do so. The children and staff of the kindergarten began to cry and beg the teacher not to leave, but to stay with them to protect them if the goblins started to break in. Another group of children begged Tayo to save Hyan and Songhook, bursting into tears as they imagined their inevitable death in the garden. The man really wanted to swear, but it was impossible in front of the children. He had absolutely no idea how to act in this situation and what would be right. At this time, the windows of the houses next to the garden shook from a piercing scream. It was so sharp and loud that even the window panes shook. It was Yan Hyan who discovered in horror that Jonhook had been attacked by a goblin. The boy was practically in his hands. The sharpest teeth were right next to the child's face. An axe was at his chest. Yeonhuk also screamed deafeningly. He realized that in a moment the monster's axe would fall on his head. Yan Hayan couldn't allow this. The girl decided to use mania and intuitively directed a powerful blow at the goblin, shouting that he should stop immediately. The blow was wide-ranging. It was more like a forceful protective shield, with which Hayan pushed the monster away from her friend. The goblin flew upside down several meters to the side, and the girl rushed to Yeonhuk to make sure he was okay. The boy just gasped and groaned, and Hayan tried to help him get to his feet so he could run to shelter. The goblin raised his axe and growled. Feeling the threat, he literally fell into a rage and prepared a new attack on the children. Yeonhuk's leg was injured. It seemed he had twisted it, and now he couldn't move on his own, but only by leaning on Yang Hayan. They walked very slowly. With every step the boy winced in pain, but still continued to move forward little by little. But when he looked back and saw another monster, Yeonhuk forgot about everything, grabbed his friend by the wrist and ran away. The troll with the mohawk grinned, his eyes glowing red and drool streaming from his mouth. It was a disgusting sight. The girl asked what they should do. Yeonhuk answered that adults would definitely come to help, but to wait for them, they needed to hide somewhere. Ahead, the children saw a climbing frame that looked somewhat like a cage. They could climb onto it from above or jump between the bars in the hope that the goblins wouldn't get to them there. Yan Hayan climbed up first. The boy helped her up and protected her from attack. Fortunately, the goblins were slow. When it was Yeonhuk's turn to go up, he heard a strange sound behind him and guessed that the enemy was already close. The goblin with an axe stood literally a few meters away and carefully watched the children's actions. They seemed funny to him. The boy shouted at Hayan to climb further. Yan was indignant. She was worried about her friend because he also needed to be saved. The girl began to stutter out of excitement. To calm her down, Yeonhuk spoke loudly and calmly. He said that he would hold off the monster until one of the adults appeared. The boy grabbed his plastic sword with both hands. He was determined, but Hayan begged him to come to his senses and climb up. The goblin slowed down in surprise. Due to his stupidity, it was difficult for him to distinguish a toy weapon from a real one, so before attacking, he needed to assess the enemy. Yeonhuk's eyes flared with anger. Perhaps he possessed the same gift of flame as the fire demon, the throne that saved Yeonhu and Yuna. At least the child would really like this. He saw a story from the bridge on TV and was very inspired. Right. During the news broadcast, Yeonhuk decided who would be his idol now. He shouted so loudly that not only the neighbors but also the residents of the entire area heard it. The boy dreamed that in the future he would become a hero, and maybe even the throne itself. He has every chance of this, because he is agile and strong. Standing in front of the goblin, Yeonhuk gripped his sword very tightly and repeated that he would become a famous hero like the fire demon. He even goaded the monster into attacking, calling him a weakling and peppering his speech with choice curses. And where did a 6-year-old boy pick them up? The goblin began to get furious. He clenched his teeth tightly and began to prepare for an attack, fingering the handle of the axe. Finally, a disgusting battle cry burst from his throat. The monster decided to intimidate the enemy before attacking, just in case. Yeonhuk was afraid, but the boy reassured himself that he had trained a lot, and now he just needed to remember how to thrust with a sword. As the goblin approached, the boy closed his eyes and swung his plastic weapon with all his might. Of course, it was not possible to injure the goblin in this way. The sword simply flew to the side without leaving a single scratch on the enemy, but slowing him down a little. To avoid the axe blow, Yeonhuk crouched down. The boy was indeed quite agile and smart, but he had little chance of standing up to the goblin. The monster swung his axe again. Fortunately, someone appeared behind the monster who knew exactly how to defeat him, and it was not a player or a hunter. It was Yunha, who had quietly crept up from behind and was about to stab the enemy in the back. The axe never landed on Yeonhuk's head. The goblin swung, but completely out of place. Our hero's plan worked perfectly. Yeonhuk continued to cover his face and head with his hands, but soon realized that this was not necessary yet, and carefully opened his eyes. He looked at the goblin and saw that he was distracted by someone else. This was a chance for salvation, and a good chance at that. Yang Hae-yeon watched from above. It wasn't like she was very relieved when Yunhee appeared. but 2 boys against 1 monster were better than 1. Our hero jumped forward, armed with a sword, covering his friend with himself. He was full of righteous anger. Yeonhook sat on the ground and couldn't figure out whether to run away or climb up to Hyan, or maybe stand next to his former enemy and fight against the goblin shoulder to shoulder. Yunha glanced at the boy and praised him, saying that he had acted like a real man. It was difficult for the child to understand what he meant. Sometimes the hero forgot that he was in the body of a 6-year-old boy and said adult things, but still, Yeonhook was pleased. Yunha didn't notice how the goblin made an incredible jump to finally end this stupid battle. At the last moment, Yeonhook noticed the danger and shouted a warning. The axe missed, but Yunhee's sword, shrouded in mana, made a wide swing and hit the target right on target. And not just once, but 3 times. After this series of blows, the goblin was left without the hand in which he held his formidable weapon. She flew off somewhere upwards, and now the boy could strike as many times with the sword as it took to destroy the monster. His eyes were shining, and his blade, shrouded in mana, was shining too, and after each strike, the sword left a glowing blue trail in the air. Finally, in front of the astonished Yeonhook, Yunha simply cut the goblin in half. Fortunately, Yang Hyang did not see this. The girl had already closed her eyes when the first blood was spilled. A blue gem bounced across the ground. It was the monster's core, meaning the boy had managed to defeat it. Yunhee's final sword strike whistled through the air. The enemy disappeared, leaving behind only the artifact. The goblin was destroyed. The boy was pleased. Now he could take a breath and cheer up the children with a smile and suggest that Hyan go down to return to the kindergarten. But Yunha couldn't do this, at least not right away. Yeonhook rushed to him with hugs, repeating that the guy was a real hero and pouring out gratitude. He was so excited that he knocked our hero to the ground. He began to get angry. He did not expect such a flow of tenderness and was not ready for it. The girl also came down and joined her friend, and now they cried and thanked Yunhu together. Yang Hyang and Yeonhook filled the boy with tears and cried out that they were incredibly scared, but he heroically saved them. Our hero tried to get rid of them, gently, or not so gently, but he still shouldn't forget that we were talking about 6-year-old children. Sometime earlier, he had put a lot of effort into getting out of the kindergarten and rushing to help them. While Tayo couldn't decide what to do, Yunha came to the door. They didn't pay any attention to him, so the boy carefully crept outside and closed the room so that no strangers could enter. It was easy to get out, but it was necessary to use special vision to assess the situation. Yunha decided to use magic. Using the power lines, he saw where the mana clusters were in the area, which could indicate the location of Hyan, Yeonhook, and the monsters. The boy felt calmer when he saw that the children were safe and sound and had managed to escape from the goblin. Then, from the side, he saw that the second monster had managed to get into the building. It was incredible luck that Yunha had come out and noticed it before it attacked the children and staff. His legs were very powerful. Ironically, the monster was just approaching the gym, as if he was planning to pump up his muscles even more. The goblin had that same horned skull on his head. It limited his view quite a bit. The monster turned his head in all directions, trying to get his bearings. Then the goblin heard a thin, childish voice asking what the hell he was doing there and began to shake his head even more intensely. Yunha stood before him, his head bowed forward menacingly. In his hand he held the same stationary knife with which he had fought the divers and the kraken. The boy extended the blade and enveloped it in mana, then gestured to the monster that certain death awaited him now. The goblin did not wait for this moment and rushed into the attack, intending to simply trample the impudent child. But this child, as we know, was far from simple. Yunha crouched down and dealt his first blow to the monster. Then he jumped behind the monster and attacked it from behind to consolidate his success. After all, the wounds from the paper knife were not too serious. More mana was needed. Our hero did just that to test the weapon. He waved it in front of himself a couple of times and was completely satisfied. Now it was necessary to test this amount of energy on the goblin. Yunha jumped up and hit the monster in the back with all his might, the blow supported by the mass of his body. The monster screamed in pain. Its visibility was limited by a helmet made of a skull with horns, and it was completely impossible to fight off the nimble opponent behind its back with an axe. The goblin spun around, swinging his axe aimlessly, while the boy jumped up and attacked him over and over again. Like a ninja, Yuna flew around the goblin, inflicting more and more wounds on him. After all, a child's body had its advantages. It was small and light. With the last blow, our hero cut the goblin from shoulder to bottom. No one could survive after that. The boy landed on the ground and saw that the monster's core was lying in front of him. The enemy was finally destroyed. The stationary knife was destroyed in the same way. Almost the entire blade got stuck in the goblin's body and then disappeared along with him. This weapon can no longer be used. Yunha threw him to the ground and thought that everything had worked out quite well, but he needed to find an alternative and hurried to help Yeonhook and Yang Hyeyan. The boy quickly rushed forward, looking along the way for anything that could be useful in the battle with the goblin. As we already know, a plastic sword will come to hand. Yunha picked him up, enveloped him in mana, and rushed to save his friends. Everything happened very quickly, literally in a matter of minutes. Now, fighting off the frightened and grateful children, our hero remembered the goblins and thought that today fortune was on his side. Just at that moment, Teacher Tayo ran out of the building, armed with the now familiar sweeping brush. He asked if everything was okay. Yang Hyun and Yeonhook continued to cry and yell, and Yunha was simply confused and didn't know what to answer. The boy thought carefully, then closed his eyes and said in an uncertain voice that yes, it was okay. After a while, parents, the press, the police, and players from the clan that was engaged in catching goblins gathered around the garden. One of them questioned Yunhu. The first thing he was interested in was whether the boy killed the goblin with his own hands. Our hero did not lose his head and reported that even before meeting him, the monster was very badly wounded, and before he could hit it a couple of times, it disappeared. Handing Yunhei the monster's core, the man said that even if the goblins were 7th or even 8th grade, a child would still not be able to defeat them. Monsters can be killed with weapons imbued with mana, or with a very strong physical attack, the player added. He sighed and asked, what about the goblin in the hallway? Someone had killed him too, and the second core of the monster had been found there. The boy replied that he probably killed the goblin who killed the goblin in the corridor, because someone had caused serious damage to both of them. Apparently they had a disagreement about something. Yunha smiled and scratched his head in embarrassment. The man looked at him and decided that such a cute child would not lie. The leader of the player clan publicly apologized to Doan Garden for allowing the goblins to enter the territory, and the matter was quickly hushed up. The government promised additional funding to the employees and the institution itself, and everyone was satisfied. Then the press was introduced to the hero of the day, a 7-year-old boy who killed a goblin to save his friends, Yunhu. He was solemnly presented with a personalized certificate of honor with gratitude for his accomplished feat. Everyone present hummed happily to show how grateful they were to the boy and how delighted they were at his brave act. Our hero did not hear all this. He was thinking about the punishment he would receive from his parents, a lot of reproaches, or a letter of repentance. Yunha held the document in his hands and thought that now he was dead, he couldn't avoid wide publicity. Mom and Dad would definitely find out everything. The journalists asked the boy to smile wider for the photo, but he was unable to do so. He was too nervous, and his smile came out strained. After some time, a festival dedicated to the graduation party was held in the garden, and all the children's parents came to this event. Yan Hyan got the role of Sleeping Beauty. The girl really looked a lot like Snow White. According to the script, Snow White had a kind heart, and 7 dwarves lived with her, who doted on the girl. The gnomes were dressed in identical green suits with caps and happily placed a wreath of white flowers on Yang Hyan's head, which suited her very well. Teacher Tayo, who was telling the story into the microphone, and all the spectators in the hall smiled happily. The scene was very cute, and all the children were incredibly beautiful. Behind the scenes stood an angry and slightly embarrassed Yunha and Yeonhook. The boys did not like their roles and costumes. Yeonhook grabbed his head in panic. On top of everything else, he had completely forgotten his lyrics and now didn't know what to do. Yunha looked at him calmly and asked him not to panic. He only had one line of words about how Snow White shouldn't eat the apple. It was poisoned. Our hero looked at his friend and thought that after the situation with the goblins, he had changed a lot. Yeonhook started calling our hero a warrior, and it took him a lot of effort to convince the boy to change this address to Captain. It was somehow less bloodthirsty. At this time, The guy winked at Yunhei and said that for his sake, he was ready to go on stage and show what a good actor he could be. At this time, a real drama was unfolding on the stage. Snow White stood with the dwarves in front of someone with a very sweet voice, but a suspicious appearance. It was Minji in the form of an evil witch, who offered the girl to try whether this red apple was as tasty as it looked. Teacher Tayo asked into the microphone what Snow White should do, and everyone in the room began to smile again. The princess clapped her hands and agreed that the apple looked really beautiful and very appetizing. The dwarves began to persuade Snow White not to give in to temptation and not to take anything from the stranger. John Hook in the jester costume was silent. It seems he forgot the text again. The gnomes pretended to cry and were very afraid, tried to persuade the girl not to eat the apple, but John Hook couldn't utter a sound. Finally, the boy gathered his strength and said the word yes in a trembling voice, and after the first barrier of embarrassment was overcome, things went better. John Hook finally managed to finish his request not to eat the apple that the witch Minji was holding out. He shouted so loudly that everyone flinched. Teacher Tayo took the microphone to try to somehow fix the situation, but then changed his mind, deciding to give the boy the opportunity to finish the job on his own. Dressed in a jester's costume, the boy moved like a robot, shouted, pointed at the apple, and at Snow White. The crowd started to have fun. It was so childish that it was impossible to hold back a smile. No one wanted to offend John Hook, but it was hard to stop laughing. The gnomes huddled together and tried to explain to John Hook what he needed to say and how best to act in the current situation. Yuna thought that things were going badly. Finally, Minji's nerves gave out. She threw an apple at the boy and screamed at him to eat it himself and stop bothering everyone. The fruit flew straight into John Hook's mouth. The blow was quite strong and knocked the boy off his feet. Minji continued to scream that Snow White would also get hers if she didn't eat the apple right now. The gnomes began to cry and scream that John Hook was dead, and that there was practically nothing left from the original script. The situation needed to be saved, and Minji loudly announced that the jester had eaten the poisoned apple instead of the princess, after which she laughed ominously. Teacher Tayo said over the microphone that the evil witch didn't give up and forced Snow White to take a bite too. He gestured to Minji to go up to Hyan and pretend that she was also eating an apple, but the girl didn't immediately understand how best to do it. She couldn't think of anything better to do than to simply walk up to the princess and shove the apple into her mouth, like a roast pig for Christmas. Snow White, or rather Hyan, was so terrified that she could only utter the word mama, to which Minji, running off the stage, screamed that she was her stepmother, not her mother, so she shouldn't even think about calling her that. Here, Yan Hyan looked at the fruit she took out of her mouth. It was bitten. She had to continue playing her role. The girl fell theatrically and pretended to fall into a deep sleep. The apple rolled on the ground. At this time, the dwarves, under the leadership of Teacher Tayo, dragged John Hook, who had not yet come to his senses, off the stage. It was Yunhei's turn to take the stage, and the teacher put his arm around his shoulders to give the boy confidence. It was necessary to save the situation, and Tayo, adjusting his glasses, asked our hero to show his best. All hope was on him. It turns out that the teachers made bets on whose group would perform better, so our hero must save the reputation and wallet of his mentor. Snow White lay in a makeshift coffin, surrounded on all sides by beautiful white flowers, as Yunha took the first few steps onto the stage. He was very serious and tense, but tried not to show it so as not to completely ruin the performance. Yang Hyan tightly closed her eyes and tried not to move, and besides, she couldn't change her expression while Yunha was walking towards her. Whispers began to sound in the hall. Everyone was talking about whether this was the child who managed to put the goblin down. How ugly of them. Yunha slowly walked towards the beautiful Yang Hye-yeon, trying to act like an excited lover. Someone from the audience said that the boy's face scared him. This creepy child is capable of killing, since he destroyed the monster. Who knows what kind of victim will be next, someone's mother cried. Our hero thought that in his past life, he had destroyed so many monsters that they would have covered half the city. What would this woman have said then? But he was a player, an immortal. Then he heard the nasty whisper interrupting the joyful and loving voice that was shouting that the most beautiful, beloved No Yunha was on stage. It was his little sister. everything became normal again. The boy remembered that now he had a new life and he could be happy and choose any profession for himself. Yuna and her parents continued to support him from the audience, which was incredibly nice. The family did not leave any step of Yunhee unnoticed. They loved him very much. Even his tiny brother smiled and waved his tiny hand in greeting. They shouted that he was the best, the most handsome, and that his family loved him very much. The boy was embarrassed for a few seconds. But he also laughed joyfully and answered his relatives that he also loved them very much, albeit mentally, so as not to spoil the performance. Yunha walked up to the place where Yang Hyan was lying and stopped. It was necessary to do everything beautifully so that the girl would be pleased to look at the photos later. The boy exhaled loudly several times from excitement. He had never taken part in a performance before, and this would be the first time he would kiss his girlfriend in his new life. Our hero loudly and expressively said his line that there is no one in this world more beautiful than Snow White. He adjusted Hyan's hair. And finally, the kiss took place. Yunha pressed his lips to his friend's forehead. It looked very touching. The girl opened her eyes and sat up, holding out her white hand to him. It seemed the performance had ended quite effectively. The hall exploded with applause, but the ones who were happiest were our hero's mom, dad, Yuna, and little sister. The actors who played the main roles bowed beautifully to the audience, and the curtain began to slowly descend. Then he stood up again to give all the other children a chance to come out and get their share of applause. After this, the dwarves and the jester picked up Yunhu in their arms and threw him up in the air several times. This was their way of saying thank you to the hero. The boy screamed in fear. It was dangerous. One of the children might simply not cope, and then he would fall from a height right onto the scaffolding. Fortunately, everything ended well. Yunhu was caught in the strong and caring hands of his father, who decided to insure the boy. He laughed joyfully and told his son that he was very good, just a natural actor. The boy replied that it was not his merit, but the good genes that were passed on from his parents, and everyone started smiling. Mom and Yuna also came up to congratulate Yunhu. They were incredibly happy about his success and that his kindergarten days were coming to an end. Mom asked if her son had already decided what he wanted to be, since a lot of time had passed since his visit to his grandmother. The boy sat on his father's neck and thought that he just wanted to live a happy life, so that it would be radically different from the one he already had. He remembered his mother asking the same thing last year when he was drinking milk, and he had to answer in a way that wouldn't disappoint her. He didn't really know what answer would meet his mother's expectations, but Yunhee was in a very good mood right now. All the children were happy and celebrating the end of kindergarten, and our hero also succumbed to the general joy. He just wanted to continue to be as happy as he was now, and for no one to dare to interfere with that. And to do this, he needed to be able to stand up for himself, so Yunha answered his mother that he probably wanted to become a warrior. He asked his father to put him down on the ground, and his father played along with his son a little, saying that he was ready to carry out any order from such a brave warrior. Mom looked at her family with a smile. It seemed that both of them did not disappoint her, and the answer was correct. Yunha ran to the children, and she looked at her son and thought that in any case he had the right to do exactly as he saw fit. And he can count on the full support of his family, judging by what the woman saw, not only his family but also his friends. Younghook hugged the boy tightly. Soon, Yunha went to school for the first time. It was a very important day for him, because he was starting a completely new, more adult stage of life. After her welcoming speech, the director congratulated all the newcomers on their admission. Even she was a little worried, let alone the children. Yunhee was 8 and really didn't like formal events, so he just stood there and yawned. Then, out of nowhere, Minji appeared and asked why he was acting like that when the director was giving a speech. The boy replied that she was quite strange herself. The girl made sounds similar to growling, to which Yan Hyan asked them both to speak a little more quietly, since it was simply indecent. Younghook was there too. He turned to Yunha and asked when the boss would show the others who the strongest boy was. Our hero replied that he was not going to do this. Then the boy replied that he would not miss his chance and would also loudly declare himself. The children were looking forward to school life and were quite excited, but Yunha was only thinking about not attracting unnecessary attention to himself. After the ceremonial assembly, the first graders went to get to know their class through a bright and spacious corridor. Everyone was asked to say a few words about themselves, and Kim Minji was the first to do so, saying that she lives in the Hanwha area. The girl added that she went to Doon kindergarten and loves to socialize, make friends, watch melodramas, and listen to music. The class teacher, Eugenia, smiled and reminded the girl that they had little time today and they could continue another time. Minji sighed theatrically and said that if that was the case, then nothing could be done. All the children looked at her in surprise. Next was No Yunha. The teacher asked him to introduce himself and the boy stood up from his seat. He was brief, saying that he also went to Doan kindergarten and hoped to make good friends at school. Eugenia asked if the boy wanted to add anything else, but Yunha refused, saying that was all. The woman smiled and nodded, saying that she understood him, and next it was Yang Haiyan's turn to tell about herself. The little girl was very embarrassed. She stood up, lowered her head, and did not know where to start. The teacher advised her to introduce herself. The girl began to stutter as she said her name, but it took her a long time to do so, as she was very nervous. Yang Haiyan's voice was trembling, and her eyes were about to burst into tears. She was nowhere near as confident as Kim Minji. One of the boys started laughing, and Yuna looked at him angrily. The fun quickly died down. Everyone listened to what else Haiyan would say. Our hero suddenly remembered how the girl invited her friends from kindergarten to visit. She had a big and beautiful house. At the threshold, they were met by Papa Haiyan. He was a tall, dark-haired man with a rather young and noble face. The children liked it right away. They said hello and eagerly rushed inside the house. It turned out to be spacious and interesting, and besides, it was located outside the city. Papa Haiyan assumed that they were hungry since it was not so easy to get to them, so he said that he would prepare a delicious lunch for the guests. While the owner of the house was trying to figure out which of the children preferred which drink, Yunha thought that the man's face was suspiciously familiar to him. Someone asked for chocolate, someone for yogurt, someone for mango juice, and our hero tried to remember the name of Yang Haiyan's dad. He was distracted from these thoughts by the man's question about what he would drink. Yunha was embarrassed. He did not immediately understand what they wanted from him. Out of habit, he named the first thing that came to mind, espresso, but then he realized that coffee was not really suitable for a 7-year-old boy and said that he was joking and would drink banana juice. After some time, the host invited the guests to the table. The children's eyes literally ran wild. There was so much delicious food in front of them. Everyone grabbed their forks and started gobbling up the treats. It was funny to watch how carefully some kids took the food and confidently others packed it. At the same time, everyone really liked it. The children found out what ingredients were in the dishes and thanked Haiyan for her hospitality. Minji was especially pleased. With a strawberry on her fork, she bragged that Papa Hiyang was a very good cook and that she was her best friend, so she could get more dessert. The boys started joking and calling her a gourmet. The girl got indignant, and then the old nickname Drine Minji came into play. It seemed like another second, and Minji would stick a fork into Yonghuk. He continued to tease her and stick out his tongue. Yunha froze with a glass in his hand. He wasn't hungry and hadn't tried anything yet. Our hero thought about how delicious the food must be if all the children reacted to it so strongly, and then took his first sip. And then another, and another. The boy's eyes grew wider and wider. He certainly didn't expect this. He pulled the glass away from his mouth and tried to calm his emotions a little, although it wasn't that easy considering Yunha had just drunk it. The boy looked closely into the glass, feeling that thanks to the drink, his mana had been completely restored and his strength was growing rapidly. Our hero stood there with a glass in his hands and thought that this was completely impossible. Technology that year did not yet allow anything like this. The guy realized that he had just drunk a real potion, an elixir that replenishes mana in the human body. Players who entered into battles against monsters always carried potions with them, which greatly helped them survive in battle. Yang Haeyeon noticed that Yunhee had a somewhat puzzled expression and asked what it was. Maybe he didn't like it, to which the boy replied that it was very tasty. He looked closely at his friend and decided to ask her father's name. The girl was a little surprised by this question. Watching her father carefully prepare another portion of the drink, the girl replied that his last name was Yang and his first name was Sokun. If Yunha could, he would have shouted wow at the top of his voice. It was an incredible luck to become friends with the Yang Hye Yang family. Our hero's eyes lit up. He hugged Hyan and offered to become her best friends. The girl was a little confused, but smiled. The guy turned away and almost jumped with happiness. He still couldn't believe that his school friend's father was that same Yang Seok-kun. This was the man who, a few years later, was to make a real revolution in the field of potions and mana. In the future, he will become the king of the drug market and head one of the 3 largest corporations in Korea, the Alice Group. Here, Yunha remembered something else. In his past life, he had never heard of Yang Seok-kun having a daughter. And then it dawned on him, our hero realized that the girl was alive only because he saved her from the goblin in the kindergarten. The guy carefully touched his girlfriend's shoulder and called her by name. Such behavior was completely unusual for him. Hyan was alarmed. With a menacing look, Yunha said that if she suddenly had any problems at school, he would undertake to solve them without a shadow of a doubt. The girl continued to smile in confusion and nodded, continuing to hold her almost full glass of drink. On the first day of school, she also remembered that her friend had promised support, so she bowed her head and began to talk about herself. Hyan said that she also went to Doan Garden like Yunha and Minji, and she also likes to drink tea and read books. Then the girl smiled radiantly and added that she was very shy when talking to new people, but that did not mean that she avoided communication and did not want to make friends. Sitting down in her seat, Yang Hye-young tried to catch her breath. Speaking in front of the class was not easy for her. Yunha tried with all his might to encourage her friend and show that she did a great job. The teacher was also pleased. She praised Yang Hyan and said that she was a great girl for overcoming her fear. Next, Eugenia invited Jin Sun to introduce herself. The girl stood up from her seat, and all the children in the class froze. Yunha felt the tension of the others and also looked at the new classmate to see what was going on. The first thing that caught his eye was the cute, fluffy ears, the color of which matched the girl's hair. Looking below, our hero noticed a long and shaggy tail of the same color, for which a special hole was made in the shorts to make it more comfortable for Jin Sonya. The girl stood up from her chair, embarrassed, just like Yan Hyan, but she had good reasons for it. The children began to whisper and ask each other if the ears were real, if she was a monster. No, Jin Sona was not a monster. She was a half-breed. That's what they called people who were unlucky with the distribution of mana at conception. Many hated half-breeds for their resemblance to monsters, especially people who lost loved ones due to monster attacks. The girl stood with her head down, gathering her courage to speak and introduce herself. Finally, she straightened her shoulders, smiled and said that her name was Jin Sona. She didn't go to kindergarten, but she really wanted to make friends too. Many people didn't like half-breeds because of their resemblance to monsters, so most of the children in the class were forbidden to even approach the girl. Yunha didn't understand where so many stereotypes came from. The teacher wanted to offer to introduce herself to Yeonhook, but he himself had already jumped up from his seat, saying his name and adding that he loved swinging a sword, and the boss was teaching him to control mana. One of the boys asked him what he meant by boss, to which Yeonhook proudly replied that they would soon understand who was in charge. The boy pointed at his friend and said that Yunha was sitting over there. He was the most important boss here, the most important one in the class. Our hero almost fell out of his chair. Showing his biceps, the boy added that the boss was very strong, so no one should even try to act against his will. Yeonhook got really excited. He started shouting that the boss needed to be greeted with 3 cheers, and the teacher barely managed to calm the boy down. She became serious and looked at Yunhu intently. Eugenia didn't like it at all that someone in the class was called boss. The woman asked our hero to stay after school and also added that she wanted to talk to his parents. The boy was annoyed because he hadn't done anything like that at all. After school, Yunhu was left to sit at his desk while he waited for the staff room to discuss the incident. From the yard, Jeonhook's shouts could be heard about how the boss was the best and that he supported him and that he shouldn't be punished simply for being respected. After the mana tests that were mandatory for all first graders were over, Yunha went to lunch with the other kids. The school had a good cafeteria with many different dishes. Yeonhook and Sona showed above-average results, and Hye-young had so much mana that it could not be measured at all, but the girl was recorded as having average results, citing a glitch in the system. Before our hero had time to consider the results, he heard Yeonhook calling him to join their company at the common table. It was possible to eat in peace and look out the window at children from another class playing on the sports ground. Yonghuk ate everything on his tray in lightning speed and said that he would go and get more food. The girls laughed that the cook would soon remember him and stop letting him near the kitchen, to which the boy replied that he had already come 3 times today, and the woman even remembered his name. Minji was also hungry. She asked Yunhu if he was full, because the portions were somehow small and she would have to go for more. Our hero joined the conversation to joke, calling his girlfriend a glutton. He himself barely ate, lost in thought. Yunha and Minji crossed teaspoons like swords, but both were distracted by something else, forgetting about each other. It was Jin Sona, standing in the middle of the dining room, waving her tail from side to side, not knowing where to sit. Our heroes were alarmed not by the girl herself, but by the reaction of those around her. Everyone began to whisper quite loudly and discuss the tail and ears. There was also a lot of discussion about the presence of a half-breed at school. The children believed that there was no place for people like her here. Jin Sona couldn't find a place to sit down to eat in peace without listening to the constant discussions. When the girl saw a free chair and was about to sit on it to have lunch, the girls at the table made such faces that her appetite instantly disappeared. This didn't stop Sonu from trying to eat, and she asked if she could take the seat, but there was no answer. After a few seconds, one of the girls finally decided to answer, but the answer was negative. Could children really be that mean? Yunha thought. Yeonhook and Hyeon also didn't like this attitude towards their classmate at all. Fortunately, their parents were normal and raised their children adequately. The girl who had refused to let Jin Sona into her table added that she must have some problems with her head if she decided to eat with the other normal children. Her friends started to chime in that they should know their place and eat on the floor, and they wouldn't even mention clothes. Even floor rags looked better. Sona couldn't believe that she had to listen to so much nastiness about her appearance and that she should not come to school, but stay in her church. She became gloomy, but did not become aggressive, but only politely changed for disturbing the children. Minji and Hyeon stood up for the girl, reminding her offender that money doesn't decide everything and that the fact that she comes from a rich family doesn't give her the right to insult her classmate. Yunha also became very angry. He clenched his fists, and even Yonghuk asked what was wrong with the captain. While half the children in the cafeteria were laughing and inviting everyone to watch the monster cry, our hero stood up from his chair. He remembered himself in his past life, and remembered how someone told him that not all half-breeds are kind and good. Oddly enough, his friend, who was also a half-breed, told him about this. He explained that not all poor people and outcasts have a good heart. And there are, of course, exceptions, but basically those who are very different from others become embittered and vengeful. The friend then looked at Yunhu and said that there was no need to protect all half-breeds just because he, his best friend, was one. The guy's name was Jin Paran, and he and Yunha were inseparable. Our hero asked his friend why he was kind then. The half-breed replied that he was not talking about that. Then Yunha pulled his sword out of its sheath. It was unclear what he had in mind and what he was getting at, but the gesture looked quite threatening. Yunha looked into his friend's eyes and asked if Jin Paran thought he was kind because he was weak. The guy got scared and tried to defend himself with a stool. For a half-breed who was used to seeing a threat in everything, his reaction was quite justified. Yunha sternly declared that there was no need to come to his tent in the middle of the night and pester him with conversations. Jin Paran deserved punishment. He should go on patrol. The command was carried out immediately. The action took place in the Dungeon of the Abyss, the very one where our hero ended his first life, so the monster appeared almost immediately and attacked Paran. The half-breed was a skilled player, so he dealt with him in a couple of blows, but he knew well that this was far from the last monster for today. Before he could catch his breath, he was attacked by a spiky tail or the paw of some huge reptile or even a mantis monster. He failed to dodge in time. Now Paran had a rather impressive torn wound from the thorns on his stomach, and he got angry. The spiked limb hovered menacingly over Yunhee's friend again. He thought that such a monster would be difficult to deal with due to its chitinous shell. Besides everything else, the monster had extremely sharp teeth, which made the task even more difficult for the half-breed, and the monster's eyes glowed with a yellow fire. Paran grouped himself to minimize the impact of a possible blow. His plan was to attack the softest part of the mantis, the belly. The insect turned out to be faster, and with a terrifying whistle inflicted another wound on the player. That ill-fated evening was not very successful for him. Just at that moment, Yunha rushed to help his friend. He was armed with a sword, so he immediately struck the monster, cutting off its spiked limbs. Our hero loved Paran very much, so he fought to protect him, not knowing either fatigue or fear. It was necessary to act very quickly, before the half-breed's blood loss became fatal. With the next blow of the sword, the guy cut off another paw of the monster. The praying mantis screamed shrilly. He was deprived of his main weapon. His roar made the blood run cold, but Yunha did not stop. He wielded the sword very skillfully and effectively. The monster also did not remain in debt and tried to get to the enemy, but the player avoided the blows by using the speed skill. It was necessary to end this quickly, and Yunha grabbed the sword with both hands to deliver the last, most powerful blow. Everything around turned red, as if the abyss itself was asking for as much blood to be spilled as possible, and it didn't matter whether it belonged to a person or a monster. The blow was as expected. The mantis's head rolled on the ground, and our hero rushed towards his friend with all his might. Yunha pressed Paran's wound and asked him to hold on until Yuen arrived. She was a strong mage and an excellent healer. The half-breed realized that he was dying. He told his friend not to waste time on him and not to stop. They went so far into the abyss in order to destroy as many monsters as possible. Then Yunhee's partner ran up to them. The hero asked her for help, and the girl was ready to immediately provide it. But looking at Paran, she realized that she knew such wounds too well. They were fatal, and it was too late to do anything. She could only ease the pain. The half-breed turned to his friends again and told them to leave him and move on. Every second was precious. The boy and the girl did not move. They could not come to terms with such a loss and wanted to be next to Paran until his last breath. There were so many monsters in this darkest dungeon that the next battle would begin as soon as the players walked 100 or 2 meters. Yunha almost cried. He said that he wanted to hear Paran's last farewell words. It was his sacred duty. The half-breed repeated what he had already said that evening. Don't think that all creatures of his kind are good. There are many evil ones among them. As evil as he is, that's why he wants to warn Yunhu and Yuan not to trust half-breeds. The girl began to pray. Paran called himself a very bad man and died. The hand that the hero held fell lifelessly to the ground. Yunha looked at the dead body of his best friend and partner, trying to cope with the loss and understand what he had been warned about. In his next life, our hero stood in the middle of the dining room and fought back tears as he remembered that tragic day. He thought for a while, standing at the table. His friends did not understand why the boy stood up and what he was going to do. Yunha asked Minji to free up some space. The girl happily said that she knew it would be like this. She moved over and began to wait for our hero to return. Yonghuk was eager to go with the captain, but he was told to sit and eat. Yunha walked up to Jin Sonia and grabbed the edge of her tray. He still couldn't figure out what she was doing and why she was pressing him almost to herself. At first, the girl thought that her food was being taken away. She looked around in fear, as if seeking protection. The half-breed was used to being bullied and bullied, but still, being left without dinner was too much. The other girls at the table froze and waited to see what would happen next. Jin Sone pulled Yunhu by the sleeve of her blouse and asked why he took her tray. If he wasn't full, then he could go and ask for more in the kitchen. The guy smiled and explained to the girl that there was a free seat at their table and the whole company was inviting them to join them. The hero showed which table he was talking about, and Yonghuk had already jumped up from his seat and was waving his arms in greeting. The little girl looked at Yunhu with fear and apologized, but then added that they were risking their reputation by helping her. The boy made an indifferent face and said that the opinions of not very smart children did not interest him at all. Everything was fine. The girls at the table where there was no seat for Jin Son started asking each other which kindergarten Yunha and his friends were from. They decided that it would be useful to get information about them. The long-haired blonde, who apparently thought she was better than everyone else, told her friends that this was not at all necessary. The schoolgirl said pompously that it was obvious that this company was nothing special. Our heroes greeted Jin Sona warmly, but Minji immediately informed her that she would have to be patient for a little while, getting used to Yunhee's stubbornness. and the guy became angry. John Hook greeted the half-breed without taking the spoon out of his mouth and said that lunch today was incredibly delicious. He handed the girl some barley tea and suggested that she verify this by trying the divine drink. Tea in a thermos was brought from home by Yan Hyan. As we already know, it was special. The girl smiled and offered her friendship to the new girl. The friends watched as Jin Sona sat down and began to drink the offered tea and were glad that she liked it. The girl looked sadly at her reflection in the glass of drink. She still couldn't believe that someone had risked making friends with her. Finally, she exhaled and drank the entire remaining drink in one gulp, which surprised Yang Hyan quite a bit. Then the half-breed pounced on the food just as greedily, her spoon flashing so quickly that it was hard to see it. Yunha told her in surprise that there was no need to rush at all. No one would stop the girl from having a normal lunch, and she burst into tears. After lunch, the whole company went to play on the playground, and Yuna, who studied at the same school, joined them. It was a mana control training. Yunha took the lead, and the others had to hide and suppress their mana so they wouldn't be found, or use it to boost their power and run away. Jin Sona said that she didn't know how to control mana. The hero replied that it didn't matter. The half-breed knew how to be unnoticeable, and was in good enough shape that he couldn't catch up with her. Minji suggested defeating Yunha by force. The girl smiled, saying that she doubted it. Yunha noted that she did not possess telepathy, a unique gift of all representatives of the species. The guy added another rule: you can't hide inside buildings and you should stay on the territory without leaving it. Yunha said that he would count to 100 and then go looking. Everyone scattered in all directions to hide as best they could. The boy conscientiously measured out every second with a count and did not peek, otherwise the training would have been unfair. Having finished counting, our hero stretched to loosen up his muscles and shouted loudly that he was going to look for his friends. He found Yonhuk, Minji, and Yuna in literally a minute, but he had to tinker a bit with Hyan and Jin Sona. Our hero thought that Yan Hyan was great with mana, so he should leave it for last, but Sona would be a little easier to find. He listened and realized that the half-breed was hiding in the bushes nearby, but when Yunha reached them, the girls had disappeared without a trace. On the other side, there were also thickets, and the boy realized that Sona was now hiding there, but pushing the branches aside, the hero realized that he was late again. Only the girl's tail flashed behind the fence. It seems that someone had to run around quite a bit today, Yunha thought. The boy tried to catch up with his friend, but it turned out to be beyond his strength. Jin Sonoi rushed on like a comet, not responding to his request to stop. Yunha pressed and almost managed to stop him, but the key word was almost. The half-breed deftly twisted out from under his fingers. Moreover, she jumped so high that our hero did not even understand where the fugitive had gone. Pushing off from the roof of the canopy, Sona decided to jump out right in front of Yunha when he least expected it. She stood in the boy's way and firmly declared that she was not going to stop. She had not lost until he finally caught up with her. Yunha kept yelling that she should stop or at least come down, but Sona jumped on rooftops, fences, and trees, saying that she wouldn't do that. The other children thought that the girl was right. They were also found but not caught. Yonhuk rolled up his sleeves and got ready to run. Minji also gathered her resolve and rolled up her sleeves. She didn't like being deceived, and now she had a chance to fix everything. Yuna was encouraged by the fact that the game wasn't over. She thought that with the help of mana, she could run even faster. A minute later, Yunha found himself in the middle of the court, confused. He didn't know which of his friends to catch up with first, and was very angry and exhausted. The children were running around and screaming deafeningly. Our hero was ready to breathe fire from frustration and tear his hair out from the noise. But since things had taken such a turn, he turned on the speed, also using mana, and promised that he would now catch up with everyone. Jin Sona stood among the treetops and watched what was happening with a smile. She didn't plan to go down yet. A few minutes before, Yang Hae-yeon was walking along the stairs and thinking about where to find a secluded place to hide from Yunhee. She heard the boy finish counting and announced that he was going to search. He needed to suppress his mana. The girl concentrated and coped with this task quite easily. Her father taught her to control her energy well. It was forbidden to enter the premises, but here Hyan saw a lot of books through the open door. If the doors were not closed in them, it was probably possible to enter. There were several stacks of books on the landing itself. Some of them were children's books, so the little girl was literally burning with curiosity. She loved to read. Some of the stacks of books were as tall as Hyan herself, and she began to wonder who had put an entire library here, and for what purpose. The inside of the apartment was clean and spacious. The books were stacked neatly and lovingly. Curiosity overcame fear and anxiety about breaking the rules. The girl could not resist and picked up a rare edition of Exupery's The Little Prince. It was one of her favorite books. Hyan thought that this was some kind of paradise, but she still had to leave the room to avoid getting into trouble. But then the girl saw a book about Alice and decided to stay for a minute longer. The image of a white rabbit literally captivated Hyan, and it even seemed to her that the animal on the cover moved. Hyan asked herself what it was. She didn't expect to hear an answer, but then someone said in a rather soft tone that it was Alice in Wonderland, and an elderly man in glasses appeared behind the girl. Hyan hiccuped in horror, but the little girl didn't scream, but looked questioningly at this unfamiliar grandfather. Meanwhile, Yunha caught up with each of their company, and together they began to look for young Hyan. She was not on the street, so the company went up the stairs. They heard a voice behind the doors. Our hero went inside, hearing Hyan asking where Alice ran next. He was incredibly angry. The girl was sitting on the lap of an elderly man with glasses. He was reading Carol's book out loud to her. Streams of mana were swirling around. The picture looked surreal. Yunha greeted him and said that they were playing, but his friend had disappeared, and he found her here. Hyan jumped off her grandfather's lap, who sighed that she should have warned him about her friends. Yang Hyeon muttered that she had forgotten about it. Yunha was seething with anger, and his friends each reacted to what was happening in their own way. The boy tried his best to control himself so as not to scream, but he asked again how it was possible to forget, in such a tone that Hyan hiccuped again and began to apologize. Our hero tapped her on the head, as if hinting that she should use its contents for its intended purpose, but quickly stopped. Yunha realized that if he continued to scold her, tears would flow. He had to stop his friend from crying and change the subject. The boy apologized for interrupting his reading, to which his grandfather replied that he was bored until Hyan came, and that they had a great time together, and that he was glad to meet someone who loved books. The elderly man added that he wanted to make friends with the children and invited them to visit him more often. Hyan was incredibly happy with this offer. She widened her eyes with joy and said that she would come back here tomorrow. She really wanted to finish the book. Yunha took the girl by the hand and reminded that it was already late. It was time for them to go home. The children said goodbye, turned around and headed for the door, but then their grandfather asked them to wait a little before leaving. He held a phone in his hand and asked if they needed a ride. All they had to do was call his driver. The luxurious car arrived at the house almost instantly. None of the children had ever seen such a luxurious car before. The old man offered everyone a ride, and of course Yeonhuk rushed forward first. Yang Hyang followed him. Since the two of them and Jin-san lived far away, the children happily settled into the back seat and did not hide their delight. The grandfather commanded the driver to move off, and the car began to move smoothly, as if it were floating on water. Yuna, Yunha, and Minji, who were just a short distance away from home, watched their friends go. They had no need to go anywhere. Our hero stood with his fists clenched. He had never seen such an expensive car. Even in his past life, the boy had never driven one like this. Yunha caught himself thinking that he was a little jealous of his friends. He even felt a little sad and offended for himself. The next day it rained, and the children came to school in a rather depressed mood, as this meant that outdoor play was temporarily unavailable. Yunha sat in class and looked sadly out the window. He had prepared an excellent mana control training for his friends, but that would have to wait for now. Here he overheard that Eugenia was going to enroll him as a candidate. The boy tried to understand what had happened while he was lost in thought. It turned out that the teacher had decided to hold an election for class president, and now Yunhee's name appeared on the list of candidates on the board. Our hero raised his hand and asked in confusion why Eugenia had written him down among those who were being elected to the position. The teacher turned around and answered, "Why such a question? She was told that he wanted to be class president." Minji pointed her finger at Yeonhuk. The boy looked at him menacingly. but his friend did not feel guilty, but was quite pleased with his actions. He smiled and clenched his fists, anticipating his captain's imminent victory in the elections. For some reason, Yunha himself did not show such enthusiasm. Yonghuk raised his hand and said that this would be the best class president out of all the class presidents in the world. Yunha sat with his hands clasped together and thought that now Cho Yonghyuk could not count on his help, but his friend continued to shout that the guy should take this position. Thinking that this arrangement was no good, our hero raised his hand and informed Eugenia that he was rejecting his candidacy. The teacher replied that since Yonghuk had chosen him, it would simply be impolite to refuse. The trust shown in him was priceless. When she heard that Yunha thought he was not fit to be president, she said that this couldn't be true. All children have unlimited potential. The boy continued to get angry and asked Minji why she didn't tell him about Yonghuk's actions, to which the girl replied that she told him everything, but he just didn't listen. Eugenia happily reported that Yuna was the only candidate for now. Maybe one of the kids would also like to try out for the role of class president. A blonde woman from a wealthy family raised her hand, whom we knew from the situation with Jin Sona in the school cafeteria. Her name was Sena. She said that she always dreamed of a leadership position like her father's. The girl even feigned embarrassment, apparently especially for the teacher. Looking back at Yunhu, Sena gave him a haughty look, as if to let him know that the post of president was already in her pocket. Yunha had mixed feelings. He didn't want to be the class president himself, but he absolutely didn't want to see Sen in that role either. The next day, closer to lunch, a whole box of burgers from one of the large fast food chains, which was very popular, appeared in the classroom. The driver held the treat, modestly looking down, and Sena invited everyone to take one burger each, which her father had bought. The children were delighted and started shouting at the top of their voices that today there were burgers for lunch and Sena was the best. The girl was happy. Everyone started talking about electing Sena as class president, and she promised that in that case she would hand out burgers once a month. Yunha and his friends stood a little to the side and watched what was happening. It was still too early to draw conclusions. Then Sena came up to him and handed him a burger. It smelled very appetizing, apparently, and tasted no worse. The girl held the food right in front of Yunha, gesturing for him to take the burger, and when the boy extended his hand, a clarification followed. Sena handed the burger to Yunha, saying it was her thanks for his precious vote in the presidential election. This was too much, our hero thanked him, but said that he was not hungry, and in general he was not a fan of fast food. The boy turned around and walked away from the sly woman who had decided to bribe voters with a free treat. Sena once again loudly voiced her election campaign. In short, for every vote she promised one burger a month. Yunha sighed. She was still a child. Here, the hero's attention was drawn to his friends, who gestured to him to look in the other direction. Yonghuk stood there holding the burger in his hand. It was obvious that the boy was struggling with the huge temptation to eat it. And yet he didn't do it. Putting the food behind his back so he wouldn't see it, the rest of the friends from Yunhee's group also refused, and Minji even said that she wasn't homeless enough to eat such a thing. Our hero wanted to say that if you are hungry, there is no point in refusing burgers. He still does not want to be president, but still decided to respect everyone's personal choice. The boy realized how devoted and loved his friends were to him, and he decided to let things go as usual. Half a year passed, and on the weekend, the children from Doan Elementary School were supposed to go on a traditional spring excursion to the mountains. The first graders were given identical field uniforms, parents prepared food to take with them, and the teacher explained the rules, the main one being that everyone should be attentive. The children were excitedly discussing the upcoming event, and the teacher had to shout over them to take the roll call. Eugenia asked the class president and vice president for help. One was to read out the names, the other was to mark those present. The president was Jin Sena. She casually adjusted her hair and said that she would be happy to carry out this task if the vice president did not interfere. It was Yunha. Our hero was seething with rage, but did not start a scandal, simply agreeing to do what the class teacher asked. Then the teacher decided to double-check everything. Yunhu asked to count the children and gave Seni a sign with the class number to hold. Finally, everyone was ready, and the ascent began. Yan Hyan almost immediately found an incredibly beautiful flower and gave it to Eugenia. Everyone was in a great mood. The teacher talked a lot about traditional Korean wooden architecture. showing the most interesting details. Finally, it was time for a break. The school children spread out their mats and looked forward to lunch. Yunha opened the box of food that was packed for him at home. There was a message from Yuna. His sister wrote in ketchup that she loved him. The guy became embarrassed and started to rack his brains when Yuna managed to write this. Everyone else smiled, saying that his food looked delicious. Minji came up and noticed that she was a loving sister. It was very sweet. The boy asked his friend to speak more quietly and asked what kind of lunch she had. The girl opened the container. Inside were beautifully decorated sushi, grilled sausages, something else cute and sauce. Then the friends heard excited cries that the most beautiful dinner was at Yan Haiyan's, and they both turned around to look. The girl's container contained a cutlet in the shape of a teddy bear lying in a crib under a blanket of cheese, lots of fresh vegetables, and a side dish. Remembering her father, Yunha thought that it was predictable. Then they heard Yonghuk shouting that the best food for a hike was noodles. The boy was very pleased and literally glowed with happiness. Minji asked why he didn't prepare food for the road. Instant noodles are not the best option for a first grader. Yonghuk laughed and said that he didn't need any other food, since his mother said that cup noodles were the best. Then that's how it was. Minji and Yunha looked at his satisfied face and decided that there was no need to voice their thoughts on this matter. They felt sorry for each other because Mom didn't even bother to pack Yonghuk lunch, but they both decided to just pretend that noodles were a fine choice. The previous night, something sinister had happened in this part. A young man had run as fast as he could, weaving through the trees. He looked back and cursed foully. Apparently something much more threatening was running after him. While wondering where a monster could have come from in this area, the guy didn't notice a root and caught his foot on it. As he fell to the ground, he heard a menacing growl behind him and thought that this was the end. There was no chance of salvation. But it was still possible to at least try to get up. The young man tried to lean on his hands, but apparently his shoulder was dislocated during the fall. Right in front of his face stood a clawed black paw. The monster whose appearance the guy had been waiting for from behind decided to show itself from the other side, or maybe it was a second monster. It was hard to say. Hounds, Class 7 monsters, never moved alone. They hunted in packs, chasing down their prey and then killing and eating it. The man jumped back, shouting for help, but there was someone behind him too, and the hero's back collided with even more powerful paws. He looked there in horror and saw a hellhound, a monster that was already classified as level 6. The guy didn't expect such a turn of events. The last thing he said was that it wasn't fair. A few seconds later, in the place where the man had recently been, only blood-stained shreds remained. The hounds tore the prey to pieces and then greedily ate everything they could bite off. There were too many of them to get their fill of everything. So the hellhound commanded the others to stop immediately so that she could get the best piece. The two simple hounds wanted to object, but retreated, feeling the power and strength that emanated from this larger monster. Finally, the hellhound was full and allowed the others to finish their meal, and they pounced on the food with even greater zeal. When the job was done, the main monster began to howl, which was a signal that the pack should now continue its advance south. A little further south, first graders were happily discussing what they had seen and sharing treats with each other. Then the teacher suggested that everyone complete a secret task, playing a game of searching for an impromptu treasure. Everyone picked out a small piece of paper folded in half, and when Yunhee's group unfolded their notes, everyone got only one single word: nothing. Yonhuk wasn't used to losing. He said very sadly that he had nothing. Sona replied that she had the same thing. Yunha suggested not to bother. Listening to the other boys find hidden pieces of the map, Yonghuk declared that he and the captain simply had to find the treasure, to which our hero asked if he was a pirate by any chance. Minji said that this was no good. She decided to go and pull out a couple more pieces of paper. They were going to get lucky after all. The girl's eyes were burning with fire. All the friends in the company supported the idea. Only Yunha said that he didn't like it all, turned around and went for a walk. But it was not to be. Minji caught up with him, put her hand on his shoulder, and menacingly asked where he was going anyway. We had to go back and play. After the picnic, the children continued their hike to Mount Bukan. Yunha was the last one to trudge along, constantly whining that he was tired. The rest of the children were cheerful and happy. Our hero was plunged into unpleasant memories. Just behind this mountain he once fought with a whole army of goblins, accompanied by hellhounds, in a past life, of course. The group of friends was walking at some distance from the rest of the class, so when a rustling sound was heard in the bushes, everyone froze. It was unlikely that it was one of their classmates. Sona asked in fear what it was. Yan Haiyan didn't hear anything, so she started asking the others what happened. Yunha, with a frightened face, gestured to the others to be as quiet as possible and not move. The hounds, who had not had a very hearty dinner in the evening, finally reached the southern slope of the mountain, and it was them. Minji saw the monsters first and pointed her finger in their direction, not understanding what kind of monster was in front of them. It was the first scout hound, its eyes glowing red and its mouth drooling in anticipation of prey. Yunha looked closely at the monster and tried to figure out how far away the rest of the pack was. The hero knew that hounds don't hunt alone. Considering that the scout smelled strongly of blood, the guy realized that the monsters had already killed someone recently, so the rest of the group might not be in too much of a hurry. The hound was getting closer and closer. For Yunhee, it was a very unpleasant encounter. He had just recently remembered the other side of this mountain and the bloody battle there. The monster didn't think for long, and the next moment made a huge leap towards the children, showing all its teeth at once. Everyone stepped back, but Minji stumbled and fell to the ground. The girl was terrified and believed that these were the last seconds of her life. As the monster flew right above the little girl, ready to tear its prey apart, something happened that absolutely none of the children expected. Yunha jumped up and kicked the hound in the side with all his might, disrupting its flight path and distracting it. The monster fell to the ground, its tongue hanging out. The blow was surprisingly strong. Minji was saved, at least for now. Yunha, his eyes glowing with radiance, raised a fork, shrouded in mana, over the hound to completely neutralize the monster. Time after time he struck. The monster's blood sprayed in all directions, but the boy did not stop, knowing that as soon as he destroyed the core, the creature would disappear. The children looked at him and could not believe that this was the same kind and sympathetic classmate whom they knew well. Minji, whom he had saved, looked especially stunned. Finally, the hound's body burst into flames and Yunha breathed a sigh of relief. At least for the next few minutes, the threat was over. A trembling voice came from behind our hero, asking if he was okay. The boy nodded. Turning around, he asked the same thing to Minji. The girl answered affirmatively, but it was obvious that Yunha scared her terribly, maybe even more than the monster. John Hook asked the captain to ask a question. Our hero allowed it, but the boy said that he could not formulate what he wanted to say. He thought and said that in front of him now was not at all the captain they all knew, with whom they were friends. Yunha wiped his face with an equally dirty hand in frustration, realizing that Yonghuk had seen him in the form of a berserker. He became like this every time he fought monsters, and it was in this state that Yunha earned the nickname of the Immortal. The boy looked at his hands and thought that he shouldn't have shown this side of himself to the children. He said that he was just too excited about what happened. Yunha decided that he would not make such a mistake again and would protect his friends from bloody and violent scenes. Just at that moment, John Hook asked the captain what they should do now, to which he received the answer that, of course, they should run, and the faster, the better. Yunha remembered that hounds always moved in packs, and they were almost certainly coming down the mountain now, so he had little chance of saving the entire class. He decided that he had to at least save his friends, so he asked them to listen to him carefully and do as he told them. What followed were detailed instructions, but we'll talk about what Yunha said to his friends a little later. A little earlier, the rest of the children in the class were busy searching for treasure among the rocks on the hill. Sina laid a handkerchief on one of the large boulders and decided to sit down to rest. Taking out her phone, the girl told her friends that she would wait here while they searched for treasure, and so they should bring her what they found. One of the guys muttered that this was too much. They wanted to at least rest a little. They couldn't walk much after the picnic. Sina narrowed her eyes and looked at the children with such a look that it became clear that it was impossible to disobey her. Several girls said in fear that they would be happy to go searching, and the boy with glasses also joined them. For quite a long time, Sina sat alone, playing a game on her mobile phone and not being distracted by anything. Then, from somewhere to the side, screams and the sound of breaking branches were heard, The girl became wary, but not too much. Then her frightened and sweaty friends, who had previously gone to look for the treasures hidden by the teacher, ran out to her. Sina's face darkened. She was mortally frightened, and in a trembling voice asked what had happened. The children might not answer. She herself noticed that a monster was chasing them. Or rather, several monsters. The girl even knew that they were called hounds. The girlfriend rushed past and tried to climb the rocks and hide among them. Sina continued to sit. In order to get up and turn around, she needed time, but she didn't have it. The hound took a running start and jumped up to reach its victim in one fell swoop and finally eat its fill. Sina sat and was afraid to move. She didn't want to die at all, but it was impossible to do anything in the current situation. Although why it's impossible, the girl began to scream deafeningly and kick her legs in order to turn around and crawl back at least a little. She wasn't very agile, so she couldn't swing her legs over to the other side of the stone. The hound's mouth was already very close. The girl screamed loudly and called for help from at least someone, and help came. At the very last moment, a shot rang out, and the monster began to fall down. Sina covered her face with her hands and cried bitterly. The hound lay on the ground, unable to get up and finish what he had started. It was unclear who had shot. The bullet casing bounced off and rolled down. Yunha stood near the stones, armed with a pistol. The classmate took her hands away from her face. When our hero realized who he had just saved, he grimaced, but still advised the girl to go down the mountain. He added that he had cleared the way, and that if Sina wanted to survive, she had to move very quickly and not deviate from the road. The classmate was in a state of shock and asked several times what the boy had just said. Yunha patiently repeated. The new hounds were rapidly approaching. They could already be heard very well. Any minute they would appear from the bushes. Seeing that our hero turned around to go meet the monsters, the girl grabbed him by the sleeve and said that he should protect her. Tears rolled from her eyes, but Sina continued to order our hero to stop and not go anywhere from her. Yunha looked at her with such a look that Sina fell silent. The guy said clearly that he did not advise her to get in his way. Let's go back in time a little more and remember the moment when Yunha asked his friends to listen to him carefully and strictly follow the instructions he received. He asked his friends to go down to the foot of the mountain as quickly as possible, and if they met anyone on the way, to immediately call the players. Yonghuk realized with horror that the captain would not go with them. Yunha said that he was going to look for the others. Then the boy shouted that he would go with him. He was learning to control mana. The answer was negative. Our hero looked closely at his friend and advised him to stop messing around and concentrate on survival. That was the most important thing right now. Yonghuk apologized, and Sona put her hand on his shoulder to show that he could count on her support at any time. Yunha told his friends that they were all one team now and were obliged to help each other, even if someone didn't like something. He added that the hounds were very sensitive, so in order to avoid detection, the children would need to completely limit their mana, as he had previously taught them. After this, our hero went into the thicket to put his preliminary plan into action and, if possible, protect his friends from the pursuit of monsters. The first thing Yunha did was throw out all the food from Yang Hyang's container. It was a kind of diversionary tactic. The dishes prepared by the friend's father contained a lot of mana, and the hounds could easily be distracted by it and follow a false trail. The boy had only just thought about it, and the monsters had already sensed that somewhere nearby there was energy that they could profit from. Yunhe's next step was to find out where exactly the monsters were and how many there were, which required using a special skill. Yunha, as a locator, began to study the territory with the help of tiny beams of energy. He had studied this skill for a long time in his past life, but in his child's body, he had not yet tried to use it. He saw both the hellhound and its entire pack of common hounds. The children were a little to the side, and their route did not intersect with the monsters. This was encouraging. With huge leaps, Yuna headed towards the hounds in order to start the fight as far away from his friends as possible and not expose them to unnecessary danger. The mountain was dark and gloomy. Our hero felt that there were many more monsters than he saw. It was just that the rest had not yet managed to get closer. The boy thought that he definitely wouldn't have enough mana for everyone. Of course, there was still some tea left in the thermos from Hyan's father, but it had to be saved. A noise was heard from behind the trees. A gust of wind brought the sounds of the hounds moving. They were racing at full speed, but not towards Yunhei. The pack attacked a man, apparently a player, who tried to stop them alone and failed. He was still alive and begged for help, but he knew that there was simply no one to save him in the forest. There was no hope for this. Several hounds immediately began to tear pieces off the man's back and eat them without leaving the body. They were strong and muscular individuals who needed a lot of meat to keep themselves in such shape. Yunha attacked the largest hound unexpectedly, but his blow was so strong that it knocked the monster off its feet and destroyed it immediately. While the other monsters were pondering whether to attack our hero, he decided to check what the player was armed with. Apparently, the man didn't even have time to take out his weapon, which surprised not only No Yunhu, but also the hounds. At first, the boy discovered a long two-handed sword, but it was in the body of a child, so such a weapon was useless for the hero. Luckily, the player also had a short saber that was converted from a dagger, which was just what suited Yunhei perfectly. The weapon was fully charged with mana, enough to kill the hounds. Our hero was inspired. He realized that he could now save his own mana reserves by using all the advantages of the improvised sword he had obtained by chance. Yuna beckoned the hounds to him. In the current circumstances, it was much easier to repel the attacks of the monsters than to attack them himself. The boy did not have to wait long. The monsters did not perceive him as a threat. There were many of them, and the child was alone. The hounds considered Yunhu easy prey. The first of them has already made a jump to tear the impudent man to pieces. Anyone else in our hero's place would have given up. But this was Yunha, so all he was interested in was where to stick the sword, into the heart of the hound that had attacked him, or into the soft belly, not protected by ribs, but only by abdominal muscles. The hero understood that the trajectory of the blow had to be calculated very well, otherwise there was a risk that the blade would simply break and the monster's carcass would crush his childish body. When the right moment came, the boy carried out his plan and struck his blow right on target. The hound died instantly and began to burn, disappearing, but after it the others rushed to attack our hero. Yunhee's eyes glowed red as he began to enter the form of the immortal, using his berserker gift. A few jumps and sword strikes, and here he was, as if in a past life, moving through the dungeon, destroying the hounds with one blow. The enemies, just like then, did not end. In place of one killed monster, another one, no less dangerous, instantly appeared. Yunha masterfully dodged attacks and made his own. It seemed that there was no force that could stop him now. The boy pierced the hounds in a jump. Everything around was covered in the blood of monsters, but the hero himself remained completely unharmed. Many monsters were destroyed, but it turned out that this was only a warm-up. Another flock appeared from behind the mountain. The guy decided that he needed to stop fighting individually and use a wide-range attack. He leaned his hand on the ground and began to accumulate energy for the jump. Having gathered enough strength, the hero pushed off the ground with all his might and flew rapidly upward. The hounds raised their heads, not understanding what the child was planning. They had not expected anything like this from their future victim. Yuna decided to use a skill he used often when he was a player, which required turning the sword blade into many mana needles. The technique was very effective when fighting against large numbers of opponents, but it took a lot of effort to ensure that the damage was strong enough. And Yunha tried. A whole rain of small but incredibly sharp mana needles fell on the hounds. When our hero landed on the ground, many monsters were already blazing with deadly fire, but there were also those who did not receive enough damage. It was necessary to use another technique of mass destruction. There was still enough mana left in the player's weapon to carry out the plan. Yunha made incredible leaps, leaving behind a powerful trail of energy. He did not attack the hounds. They also did not move, not having time to track the boy's movements. It seemed like the battle had been paused, but that wasn't the case. The monsters were already taking damage, but so far only the faint yellow sparks around them were evidence of it. Yunha drew a pentagram over the pack with lines of force, and the spell's effect spread to all the hounds at once. Another second, and all the monsters instantly flew into pieces, leaving no one alive. The birds rose into the sky in fear, alarmed by the latest attack. Our hero needed to move on. He heard someone screeching deafeningly nearby. And now we return to the moment when our hero protected Sane. The hound at her feet began to burn, disappearing. The girl was saved. As we already remember, she forced Yunhu not to leave her alone. to protect her and not to go anywhere, but this request was not fulfilled. A classmate had to let go of the boy's sleeve after he said that standing in his way was life-threatening. Yunha remembered seeing the hounds attack Sina's driver and told her to hurry. The man needed help. He had destroyed the monsters, but his arm was injured. Saying that it was time for him to go, the hero set off at great leaps. He also needed to hurry. The girl stood there, lost in thought. It was an evil desire to take possession of something unattainable. Yunha should belong to her, fulfilling all commands unconditionally, like a faithful slave. Our hero rushed quickly, like the wind, towards the top of the mountain. He knew that the main threat was waiting there. Looking closely into the thicket of trees, the boy realized that he was almost at his destination. Black clouds of dust were rising from under the paws of the monsters. Yunha jumped high into the air to get a better look and make sure his guess was correct. Yes, the hellhound and his subjects were here. The hero crossed his weapons, anticipating an incredible battle. He decided to attack the monsters from above so that the attack would catch them completely off guard. The plan was brilliant, but dangerous. The hellhound bared its teeth and assumed a defensive stance. Even it would not have been able to jump high enough to attack Yunhu first. Yunha prepared his blade to repeat his previous successful experience of destroying many hounds at once. A blue glow of mana appeared in the sky, which the hero applied to his sword to use the small needle skill. This time the boy put even more energy into the spell, because the hellhound belonged to the 6th level monsters. The hounds sensed the threat and bristled. They had already gathered their resolve to attack, but they were a little too late. Small needles of mana poured down on them from the sky like a downpour, but this time they could only be considered small conditionally. Yunha was very pleased when he landed on the ground. He was sure that he had defeated everyone, but looking ahead, he realized that this was not entirely true. Many of the hounds were destroyed, and their bodies burst into flames, but some managed to hide behind a huge rock. The hellhound also survived and was preparing to attack. But the monster was in no hurry to enter the battle himself. First, he gave the command to his subordinates to deal with the boy. Several hounds immediately began to carry out the order and jumped in Yunhi's direction, but the boy remained calm. The monster's claws did not reach their target. Our hero dodged the attack using super speed. He was so fast that from the side it was not even visible that Yunha was moving at all. He didn't forget about the counterattack. The hero killed one of the creatures with his blade, shrouded in mana. Several more were hit with forceful blows, reinforced by the handle of the pistol, which was quite capable of acting as a heavy blunt object. The last of the monsters that attacked our hero was hit by a bullet, and the battle lasted just under a minute. But this was far from the end. Immediately, several more monsters appeared around, who without hesitation rushed to attack. Yuna became immortal again. He was already starting to get tired of the fact that the opponents just never ended. With a few blows of his sword, he destroyed the hounds that dared to close the distance. The corpses immediately began to burn. The guy stopped to catch his breath and assess the situation. Little had changed since the last time he did this. The hellhound continued to stand on the rock with a ferocious look, and around it, many subordinates were ready to pounce on the boy. Yunha wiped the sweat from his face and thought that it was time to end this quickly and decisively. The hounds had already gotten on his nerves. At this time, our hero's friends were trying to move as quickly as possible through the forest to the foot of the mountain. Each of them kept in mind Yunhi's instructions, primarily about being quick and taking care of each other. But the main task was to constantly suppress their mana. Then the children easily agreed to this, but now they did not always remember that they needed to limit their strength constantly. Yonghuk and Minji ran first, followed by Sona and Hyeyang, who were a little less determined. The children ran to the fork and stopped. They had to decide which way to turn. It was not easy. Yonghuk asked which way to go. The girl couldn't catch her breath, so she didn't rush to answer. She was very tired, but she knew she had to concentrate and give the absolutely correct answer. Before leaving, Yuna asked Hyang and Sunwoo to use their senses to avoid getting lost, and Yang did a great job. The girl unlocked her mana and used her special vision. She made every effort not to bring danger to her friends. Haiyan thought and, stuttering a little, said that there was something very bad and evil around the left turn, and that it was absolutely forbidden to go in that direction. Jin Sona, who was advised by Yunha to listen carefully to detect monsters in advance, also confirmed that there was clearly something threatening there. Minji noticed that they were all tired, but they needed to pull themselves together and continue on their way, and the children moved forward. Jonghook walked and kept asking himself why not a single player had appeared yet, since usually after the monsters appeared, they were sent away almost instantly. The boy armed himself with a stick and tried to walk at the head of the detachment, looking around carefully. Then someone grabbed his hand tightly, so tightly that his bones cracked. It seemed that something bad was starting. It was Minji who, in a firm voice, ordered Jonghook not to look back and to run forward at maximum speed. When Yunha was giving advice to his friends, he patted Minji on the head and asked for only one thing, that she keep everything under control and not allow panic in the squad. The girl was so upset at the time that she asked to be petted a few more times to calm down, but later she remained the calmest of all the children. Now Kim Minji's eyes were glowing pink. She was determined to complete the task. But there was something completely incomprehensible ahead. The children froze, trying to see what was lurking in the thickets and why they felt threatened. Hayan screamed that everyone had to stop. They couldn't go any further. She sensed monsters, and a large number of monsters. The children froze. They not only felt, but also heard something huge and ominous approaching them. Huge clawed paws walked with heavy steps. The monster that came out to meet the guys was not only very dangerous, but also quite rare. It was a hound, but not a simple one, and not a hellish one. This monster had huge turquoise spikes all over its body, as sharp as claws, and its size was amazing. Minji gasped in horror, and Jonghook gripped the stick he was armed with tighter, but the weapon was completely useless against such an opponent. It was the Hound N. Such creatures had never appeared on Earth before, so the children had absolutely no idea what to expect from her. One thing was clear, nothing good should be expected. The monster threw its head back to the sky and howled deafeningly. Jonghook asked in surprise what it was doing. Minji already had an answer to his question, the girl suggested, looking around. On the right, a huge pack of ordinary, but no less dangerous due to their number, hounds was approaching the children. On the left, there was exactly the same picture. The monsters moved in a semicircle, trying to completely surround and tear apart these stupid children who had gone into the mountains. Jonghook realized that it was now his turn to follow Yunhee's instructions and do what his friend had entrusted him with. Before leaving, our hero told the boy that in their group he is the only one who can and knows how to fight, so he is assigned the role of damage dealer if they encounter a monster. Jonghook extended his fist and thought that if it had to be done, then it had to be done. He loved to fight, so he would try. The boys bumped fists, a sign that they had reached an agreement, a kind of military ritual of honor. Cho Young-hyuk took the tree branch with both hands and exhaled loudly. He needed to envelop the weapon in mana to strengthen it. He mentally turned to the captain for support. Yunha was able to inspire and motivate his friend during all training sessions. The very thought of his captain filled Jonghook's heart with confidence and determination to defeat his enemies. Letting out his signature battle cry, the young warrior swung the branch with all his might and hit the nearest hound on the head. The weapon described a wide arc, leaving behind a trail of mana. It seemed that Yunhei had managed to teach his friend a lot. One of the monsters was left without an eye, the rest slowed down, trying to assess what kind of threat this child posed. Jonghook was happy. He managed to overcome his fear and deliver an effective blow. Now the boy was ready to engage in battle with the others. The hounds looked very ferocious, especially after one of them suffered unintentionally at the hands of a first grader. The two monsters moved towards the boy. He thrust the stick forward and began casting the strengthening spell again, using mana. To prevent the monsters from getting close to him, Cho Young-hyuk swung his hand with the branch, describing a fairly large circle around himself. One of the hounds jumped on him, calculating the moment when the branch would be on the other side. Its claws dug into the hero's shoulder, scratching him. The boy cried out in pain, but did not stop. The damage was not too serious, and only scared him a little. Several more hounds approached closely to attack Jonghook. The only thing he managed to do perfectly was to switch the attention of the monsters from the girls to himself. The hounds raced past on both sides of the schoolboy. One of them caught his side with its paw, but also not deeply. Jonghook looked down. His shirt was stained with blood. It was quite painful, but not at all as he expected, imagining his intestines on the grass. The boy checked his side and stomach with his hand and made sure that it was just another scratch. His friends huddled together and watched what was happening. It seemed that Jin Sona had guessed what was going on. After all, she was a half-breed and understood a little about the habits of animals and monsters. The girl guessed that the hounds were just playing with Yeonhuk. The boy rushed forward, shouting that he was not going to give up, because the captain had appointed him to the position of damage dealer. A pack of hounds joyfully ran to meet him. As Sona correctly noted, the monsters were still dogs, and when they saw the stick, they thought only about the game. But this time, Yunha didn't prepare a branch for them. The boy decided to use his strength and gathered the rest of his mana into a fist. Soon, one of the monsters jumped right at the child, but he was no longer afraid of anything and was ready to repel the attack. The fist of the first grader flew straight into the monster's Adam's apple. It was a very vulnerable spot, and besides, Yeonhuk used mana. The glow at the point of impact lasted for a few more seconds, and the hero decided that for his first battle with monsters, he was doing quite well. The fist ached, but the boy quickly restored it by enveloping it in an additional force field. At that moment, one of the hounds ran up to him and butted him in the chest with its head like a calf. It was completely unexpected. Yeonhuk flew a couple of meters quickly and landed on his back. The monster began to slowly approach him. The boy lay on his back and watched as the shadow of the clawed paw on his sweater grew larger and larger. Finally, the monster stepped on the boy's chest. He grunted in pain and fear. Now Cho Yeonhuk was no longer so sure that he would be able to deal with this situation. The hound showed off its huge, sharp teeth in all its glory, and the boy could only spread his arms helplessly. Minji and her friends screamed loudly, drawing attention to themselves so as not to let their friend die. Jin Sona was the one who screamed the loudest. The half-breed had tender feelings for her classmate, who was the only one who didn't doubt her for a second. The girl remembered how Yeonhuk jumped up from the table, happy that Yunha had invited the half-breed to their company. How funny they joked and offered each other the most delicious dishes, and then argued about who would get the last piece. I remembered the picnic the children had on the mountain. It was a couple of hours ago, but it seemed like a past life. Their group spent a lot of time together. Now all that will remain in memory of Yeonhuk are funny photos and memories. The monster's mouth was getting closer and closer to the child's face. If nothing was done, the first grader would die in a couple of seconds, but the friends were not timid. As the hound's teeth closed on Yeonhuk's hand, each of the girls did what they thought was right. Minji and Hayan rushed to help with a scream, attacking using mana. For Minji, this was the first experience of using mana in his life. Sona began to pray, or something like that. The girl folded her hands, closed her eyes, and knelt down. She asked for help, asked to save her friend. A fire broke out around her. Rays of flame spread out from Sona in a wide circle. It became wider and wider, quickly growing. Soon the glow began to rise above the children, like a glowing yellow dome. The sight was simply incredible. The hounds froze, and besides the fact that they were now unable to attack the children due to the light emitted by Sona, there was a distinct smell of another kind of mana in the air. Suddenly, strong currents of air lifted the monsters and spun them around, tearing them off the ground like a hurricane. Now, a blue protective dome, like the kind players usually used, was deployed above the first graders, and helpless hounds were flying around it. Minji asked what kind of whirlwinds these were, to which Jin Sona replied that they apparently wouldn't harm them. Then Minji remembered why they were here at all and screamed in fear. She remembered about Yeonhuk. The hero was lying on the ground, but he was definitely alive and conscious, which meant the girls had accomplished the task of saving him. The first grader had injuries to his shoulder, arm, and side, but all the wounds were surprisingly superficial, and he didn't even lose much blood. Then a pleasant female voice said that she hoped she hadn't scared the children too much, and the friends looked up and saw a red-haired woman in the air. She was dressed in a short suit and high-heeled shoes, which did not at all correspond to the image of a warrior, but still it was so. One of the thrones slowly descended towards the children. The red-haired woman smiled and asked if the children could close their eyes for a few minutes. Her eyes glowed with a pleasant yellow light, and in her hand was a fan. Friends immediately recognized the throne named Shin Soyun, nicknamed the Divine Wind. She looked down thoughtfully, waved her fan, and announced that now these little dogs would get what they deserved. At this very time, Yunha was also going to teach the little naughty dogs a lesson. He took out his thermos from his backpack. Inside was Machiavelli's potion, which he had prudently taken from home, thinking that anything could happen in the mountains. The hero decided that the right moment had come to drink the drink and restore his strength and mana to full capacity. Throwing the empty thermos back, the boy resolutely moved forward towards the hounds. He felt great and smiled in anticipation of the upcoming fight, the blade already glowing with a blue glow of mana. Yunha decided to deal with the main threat, the Hellhound. First, he activated the Berserker skill and rushed to attack. The blow from the improvised sword was so powerful that the huge monster literally flew back like a rag doll. Everything would have been fine, but while the main hound was coming to its senses, subordinate monsters came out to replace it. Our hero began to attack them one by one, delivering his powerful kicks. Weapons were not very appropriate here. The opponents flew in different directions, not having time to inflict any damage on the boy, but his main problem was fatigue. He landed on the ground to catch his breath, the pistol he had taken from the player working best in such conditions. There was no time to rest properly. The hounds attacked with renewed vigor as soon as they realized that the hero had landed on his feet and was in the attack zone. Well then, Yuna decided to use his remaining mana this time to perform an all-out attack with his mana-wrapped sword. With a few flying strikes, the hero took out several monsters at once, cutting them up like vegetables for soup. But Yunha moved forward with incredible speed, with pieces of the hounds' bodies flying behind him. When the entire pack was destroyed, it was time to fight their leader again, but first he needed to catch his breath. Standing amidst the burning corpses of the monsters, Yunha thought about the most appropriate way to attack the Hellhound. The best solution seemed to be to use the Heavenly Step technique to reach maximum speed. The boy rushed forward, using the rest of his accumulated mana, which was just enough to deliver a series of good blows. Yunha rushed towards the enemy and thought about how he needed to conserve his strength, but at the same time be as effective as possible in battle. He jumped up to attack the Hellhound with his sword, and if necessary, to stun it with the butt of his pistol. The monster was ready to attack and bared its terrifying teeth. It tried to put its clawed paw under the damage to resist the blow of the sword. But our hero was quicker, and foresaw such a move. He jumped up from the other side and managed to hit the creature on the head with his sword. Immediately after this, firearms came into play. The double blow slowed down the monster's regeneration, preventing it from quickly recovering. The Hellhound's eyes flashed red and flames appeared from its mouth. Yunha had not counted on a fire attack. The boy was extremely surprised, and now wondered whether this was ordinary fire or whether it had additional functions, like poisoning. The first thing that came to Yunhe's mind was to place a sword under the fireball and thus find out what its properties were. The blade didn't melt, it just heated up. But for a while you'll have to forget about close combat. The pistol will come into play again. The boy began to jump around the hound, shooting from different sides, but his main task was to protect himself from the fire. Each shot hit the target, causing the monster to whine pitifully. The guy did not stop for a second. Soon the Hellhound looked like a sieve, purple blood spurting out of the bullet holes. Yunha remembered how he drank the potion and recklessly threw away the thermos. Every extra drop would come in handy now. He ran out of ammunition, so the only weapon left was an improvised sword. Having assessed the situation, the boy realized that not only his own mana was running out, but also that of his opponent, so not everything was as bad as it might seem. Yunha grabbed his blade with both hands, trying to envelop it in mana, at least a little, enough for a couple of blows. The Hellhound quickly regenerated and was ready to attack, although the monster also no longer had much strength. But it didn't matter. The monster had another plan. It summoned some black balls. The hero knew nothing about their action. Yunha tried to figure out what it was, fog bombs, future partners, or maybe poison, but nothing came to mind. It turned out that this was a way to thicken the fog before the attack. The black shells turned into clouds of smoke, which the hound used as cover for the attack. The monster's body was not visible. It seemed that it had completely turned into a black core with teeth and a red mane. Our hero had only one way to survive, to fight, so that's what he did, trying to spot the enemy in the black smoke. Yunha wanted to use the gift of Berserker. He always entered this state in critical situations, but while it was too early, the sword flashed even faster. The black cloud began to thicken and approach the boy even more closely. He stood and wondered if the smoke would be poisonous this time. Just in case, the hero held his breath at first, but when he realized that the black cloud was not harming him, he decided it was time to act. He wrapped the blade in the remaining mana and prepared to attack the enemy first, even though he decided to use camouflage. Yunha began to make his way through the thick black smoke, but at that moment the hellhound fired a volley of fire at him. The boy had to spend the rest of his mother's energy on a protective spell, so as not to simply burn alive. He had practically no strength left to strike. Nevertheless, the hero decided to get to the monster and try to attack it at least once. He understood that the energy of the hellhound was also not unlimited. The boy made his way through the wall of fire, cutting it with his sword like a cake with a knife, but then he felt that his mana had finally run out. It was necessary to save his life, and Yunha jumped out of the smoke and fire with several huge leaps, falling onto the grass. He pressed his head against the ground and thought that he no longer had the strength to fight, and no particular desire either. Would he really have to die here in the mountains? Our hero was exhausted to the extreme degree. This had happened to him before in a past life, but never in a child's body, except for the episode on the bridge. Yunha leaned on his sword. It seemed like this was the end, but one should not forget that in the past life the end did not come. Then the immortal relied on his weapon in the same way. Having used up all his strength in battle, the other players whispered behind his back that they had taken him into the team in vain. The monsters were advancing, and someone told his half-breed friend that they would not survive, but he knew Yunhu well and reminded him of what the gift of the Berserker meant. It was activated when there was no hope left, and then any opponent would begin to regret having met the immortal. The current Yunha was not much different from his adult self. He was also immortal and thought that the end was not for him, but for the Hellhound the gift was activated. A huge blue glow of mana flared up around the boy. Now he had so much power that he could move mountains. Unfortunately, the Hound also completely regenerated, and the opponents had to start all over again.